Picture this. A man stands frozen, champagne glass trembling in his hand, as his worst nightmare walks through the garden gates. 3 years ago, he divorced his wife because she couldn't give him children. He blamed her publicly, destroyed her reputation, and remarried within months. Today, he invited her to his baby shower, not out of kindness, but to humiliate her one final time, to parade his pregnant new wife in front of the woman he called defective. But as the garden falls silent and 200 guests turn to stare, his ex-wife glides toward him in a gown that costs more than his car, and behind her, holding her hands, are 4 identical toddlers with his ex-wife's eyes. 4. Quadruplets. His legacy just became her victory, and what happens next will destroy everything he built on lies. This is a story about cruelty, karma, and a woman who turned her deepest wound into her greatest weapon. Stay with me, because you won't believe how this ends. Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome back to the channel. Before we dive into this absolutely explosive story of revenge and redemption, I need to know, where are you watching from right now? Drop your location in the comments. And how are you doing today? I hope you're ready for this roller coaster because this story will have you feeling every emotion possible. Quick question, have you subscribed yet? If not, hit that subscribe button right now because we bring you the most jaw-dropping, emotionally charged stories of justice and karma that you won't find anywhere else. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming. Now let's get into this story that will have you screaming at your screen. Isabella Reeves stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in her penthouse suite, her reflection showing a woman transformed beyond recognition. The morning light streaming through the windows caught the emerald silk of her custom-made gown, a dress that whispered wealth and power with every subtle movement. Her dark hair was swept into an elegant updo that had taken her stylist 2 hours to perfect, her makeup flawless but understated, her jewelry simple but clearly expensive, a single diamond pendant that had belonged to her grandmother, the only family heirloom she'd kept after her divorce. But it wasn't the gown or the hair or the jewelry that made her pause. It was her eyes. 3 years ago, those eyes had been hollow, empty, haunted by failure and shame. Today, they blazed with something else entirely. Not anger. Not even triumph. Something quieter but infinitely more powerful. Certainty. Behind her, in the spacious living area of her penthouse, 4 children played under the watchful eye of their nanny, Carmen. Elijah, Sebastian, Lucas, and Sophia. 18 months old, identical in their features, her features, but distinct in their personalities. Elijah, the eldest by 3 minutes, was already showing signs of being the protective one, always checking on his siblings. Sebastian was the comedian, making everyone laugh with his exaggerated facial expressions. Lucas was the thinker, studying everything with intense curiosity. And Sophia, her only daughter, was pure joy personified, spreading happiness wherever she went. They were dressed in matching outfits that Isabella had commissioned from the same designer who'd made her gown, the boys in tiny tailored navy suits with emerald ties that matched their mother's dress, Sophia in a white dress with emerald embroidery that made her look like a princess. They looked like they'd stepped out of a royal family portrait, and that was exactly the point. On the marble countertop of her bathroom, next to her perfume collection and skincare products, sat the invitation that had arrived 1 week ago. Isabella picked it up for what must have been the 100th time, reading the embossed gold lettering that seemed to mock her with every word. "Join us in celebrating new life." It read, "Dominic and Vanessa Laurent request the pleasure of your company at a baby shower honoring their forthcoming arrival." The date, time, and location followed, but it was the location that had made Isabella's blood run cold when she first opened the envelope. The Rosewood Garden Estate. Their venue. The place where she and Dominic had gotten engaged. The place where they'd celebrated their first anniversary. The place where they planned, before everything fell apart, to renew their vows. He'd chosen it deliberately. Every single detail of this invitation was calculated to hurt her, to remind her of everything she'd lost, everything she'd supposedly failed at. But Dominic Laurent had no idea what he'd actually done. He'd given her the perfect stage for the performance of a lifetime. Isabella set down the invitation and picked up her phone, scrolling through the messages that had flooded in over the past week. Her sister Maya had sent approximately 50 texts begging her not to go, warning her that this was a trap, insisting that taking the children would be using them as props in a revenge scheme. Her best friend James had called 3 times yesterday alone, offering to go with her, to run interference, to punch Dominic in the face if necessary. Her business partner had sent a practical message reminding her that they had a major client presentation the following Monday, and maybe emotional warfare with her ex-husband wasn't the best use of her mental energy. Even her therapist, Dr. Chin, had sent a carefully worded email suggesting they schedule an emergency session to process the emotions this invitation had triggered. But Isabella had made her decision the moment she'd seen that invitation. She was going. And she was bringing her children. Not because she wanted to use them as weapons. Not because she wanted to hurt Dominic the way he'd hurt her. But because he needed to see something. He needed to see that his cruelty hadn't destroyed her. That his lies hadn't defined her. That while he was celebrating one child he believed proved his worth, she'd built an entire empire and a family that proved hers. 3 years. It had been 3 years since Dominic had handed her divorce papers on what should have been their 7th wedding anniversary. 3 years since he'd looked at her across the table at their favorite restaurant, a table he'd chosen, a restaurant he'd picked, a moment he'd orchestrated, and told her that he was done. Done trying. Done hoping. Done being married to a woman who couldn't give him what every real woman should be able to give a man. Children. Legacy. Proof of his virility and success. She could still see his face that night, cold and detached, as if he were discussing a failed business venture rather than ending their marriage. Isabella, he'd said, his voice devoid of any warmth. I've tried to be patient. God knows I've tried. But I can't spend the rest of my life married to someone who's broken. I need a woman who can give me children. I need a family. I need a legacy. And you can't give me that. The words had shattered something inside her that night. Not her spirit. That would come later, after the public humiliation, after the whispered conversations at parties, after watching their entire social circle choose sides and mostly choosing his. What shattered that night was her belief that love could survive anything. Because she'd loved Dominic Laurent with everything she had. For 7 years, she'd supported his business ventures, attended his networking events, smiled through dinners with his clients, put her own career aspirations on hold to be the perfect wife. And for 5 of those 7 years, she'd endured the special hell of trying to conceive. The fertility journey had started hopefully. They tried naturally for 2 years, as doctors recommended. When that didn't work, they'd moved to ovulation tracking, timed intercourse, fertility monitors, supplements, dietary changes. Isabella had done everything right. She'd eliminated alcohol, caffeine, processed foods. She'd done yoga, acupuncture, meditation. She'd taken her temperature every morning, tracked her cycles obsessively, turned sex into a clinical procedure. And every month, when her period arrived, she'd felt like a failure. But she'd kept trying because Dominic had assured her they were in it together, that they'd figure it out, that he loved her regardless. The IVF had been his idea. 12 rounds of it over 3 years. 12 times that Isabella had injected herself with hormones that made her emotional and physically uncomfortable. 12 times she'd endured egg retrievals under anesthesia. 12 times she'd waited through the agonizing 2-week wait to see if implantation had occurred. 12 times she'd taken a pregnancy test with shaking hands and desperate hope. And 12 times she'd seen that single line that meant not pregnant, failure, try again. The last round had been the worst. By then, their marriage was already fracturing under the weight of disappointment. Dominic had stopped coming to appointments. He'd started making comments at dinner parties about how some women just aren't meant to be mothers. He pulled away physically, emotionally, in every way that mattered. And when that 12th test came back negative, he'd barely looked at her. 2 weeks later, he'd served her with divorce papers. What Isabella hadn't known then, what she wouldn't discover until 3 months after the divorce was finalized, was that the fertility problem had never been hers. The discovery had come accidentally, through a conversation with Dr. Morrison, the fertility specialist who'd overseen their IVF attempts. She'd run into him at a medical conference where she'd been invited to speak about the psychological impact of infertility. After her talk, he'd approached her privately, guilt written all over his face. "Isabella," he'd said, his voice heavy with remorse, "I need to tell you something. I should have told you years ago, but Dominic paid me to keep quiet, and I was weak, and I've regretted it every day since." What he told her next had recontextualized her entire marriage. Before we dive deeper, if you're new here, hi love. I'm glad you made it. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss stories that touch the heart. Dominic had known from the beginning that he had fertility issues. Severe male factor infertility, a low sperm count and poor motility that made natural conception nearly impossible. The test results had come back before they'd even started trying, during routine blood work Dominic had done for life insurance. But instead of telling Isabella, instead of approaching their fertility journey as a team, Dominic had hidden the results. He'd paid Dr. Morrison a substantial sum to keep the information confidential, to never mention it during appointments, to let Isabella believe that she was the problem. For 5 years, he'd watched her blame herself, hate her body, question her worth as a woman, all while knowing that he was the one with the medical issue. The revelation had sent Isabella into a spiral. The anger had been overwhelming at first. She'd wanted to expose him, to tell everyone what he'd done, to destroy his reputation the way he destroyed hers. But as the weeks passed and the initial rage subsided, something else emerged. Clarity. Understanding. Dominic hadn't just been cruel. He'd been terrified. Terrified that admitting to fertility issues would make him seem less masculine, less powerful, less worthy in the eyes of the world he was trying to conquer. So he'd sacrificed her self-worth to protect his ego. It was despicable, unforgivable, and utterly typical of the man she'd been married to. Armed with this knowledge and the substantial divorce settlement Dominic had given her, partially out of guilt, partially to keep her quiet about the details of their marriage, Isabella had made a decision. She wanted children. She'd always wanted children. And now that she knew the problem had never been her, she was going to have them. She'd researched sperm donors with the same thoroughness she'd once applied to IVF protocols. She'd chosen a donor who was healthy, educated, and had a genetic profile free of concerning hereditary conditions. She'd undergone IVF one more time, but this time, it was her choice, her timeline, her body doing this for herself and not to please someone else. The pregnancy test had come back positive on the first try. The ultrasound at 8 weeks had revealed something unprecedented, 4 heartbeats. Quadruplets. A 1 in 700,000 occurrence. The doctors had been shocked, cautious, warning her about the risks of a high-order multiple pregnancy. But Isabella had felt, for the first time in years, that the universe was on her side. Dominic had thrown her away for being unable to give him one child. Now she was carrying 4. The pregnancy had been difficult. Of course it had been. Carrying quadruplets meant months of bed rest, constant monitoring, fears of premature labor. But Isabella had endured it with a strength she hadn't known she possessed. She'd worked from her bed, building the marketing consultancy she'd started right after the divorce. She'd video called with clients while hooked up to contraction monitors. She'd negotiated deals between doctor's appointments. And at 34 weeks, in a scheduled C-section that required a team of 20 medical professionals, she'd delivered 4 healthy babies. 3 boys and 1 girl. Perfect. Hers. The first year of motherhood had been a blur of sleepless nights, endless feedings, and a kind of exhaustion that made her question her sanity. But it had also been the most fulfilling year of her life. Every smile, every milestone, every moment of watching her children discover the world had filled the void that Dominic had left. She'd hired help, a night nurse for the first 6 months, then Carmen as a full-time nanny once she'd gone back to work, but she'd been present for everything that mattered. First smiles. First words. First steps. She documented everything, posted nothing on social media, kept her children's existence private because she wanted to protect them from the circus her life had become in the aftermath of her divorce. Because her divorce had been spectacular in its ugliness. Dominic hadn't just left her. He'd created a narrative about their marriage that painted her as the villain. He told their friends that she'd been obsessed with having children to the point of mental instability. He'd implied that her inability to conceive had made her bitter and difficult to live with. He'd suggested that he tried everything to make the marriage work, but that you can't force someone to be happy. And their social circle, made up primarily of Dominic's business associates and their wives, had largely believed him. After all, he was Dominic Laurent, charming, successful, powerful. Why would he lie? Isabella had tried to defend herself at first. She'd reached out to mutual friends, attempted to explain her side of the story. But no one wanted to hear it. Messy divorces were uncomfortable. Taking sides was awkward. And Dominic controlled so much of their social world, the country club memberships, the charity boards, the business networks, that choosing Isabella meant potentially alienating Dominic. So one by one, people had drifted away from her. Lunch invitations dried up. Event invites stopped coming. She'd been erased from the life she'd spent 7 years building. The isolation had been devastating at first. But as time passed, Isabella realized it was also liberating. She was free to rebuild her life exactly as she wanted it, without having to perform for people who never really cared about her anyway. She'd reconnected with old friends from college, people who'd known her before Dominic, who remembered the ambitious, creative woman she'd been before she'd molded herself into the perfect corporate wife. She'd hired people for her company based on talent and drive rather than social connections. She'd created a life that was messy and challenging and utterly authentic. And her business had thrived. Reeves Marketing Solutions had started as a small consultancy operating out of her apartment, while she'd been pregnant. Within a year, she'd landed 3 major clients. Within 2 years, she'd hired a team of 15 and moved into actual office space. Now, at 3 years old, her company was valued at over $50 million, with clients ranging from tech startups to established Fortune 500 companies. She'd discovered that she had a gift for understanding consumer psychology and crafting marketing campaigns that actually worked. Without Dominic's shadow hanging over her, without having to defer to his opinions or prioritize his career over hers, she'd become exactly what she'd always had the potential to be. Powerful. Successful. Unstoppable. Meanwhile, Dominic had moved on with remarkable speed. Within 6 months of their divorce being finalized, he married Vanessa Chin, a 26-year-old model he'd met at some industry event. Vanessa was everything Isabella wasn't: young, doe-eyed, eager to please, and apparently immediately fertile. The pregnancy announcement had come just 3 months after their wedding. Dominic had made sure everyone knew about it, posting ultrasound photos on social media, throwing a gender reveal party that had been covered by local lifestyle magazines, generally acting like he'd won the lottery. The message was clear: see? It wasn't me. I just needed the right woman. Isabella had seen all of it: the social media posts, the magazine features, the photos of Dominic with his hand on Vanessa's growing belly. Each one had been a knife twist. Not because she still loved him. That love had died the night he'd handed her divorce papers. But because each announcement was a public validation of his narrative. He'd divorced his broken wife and immediately had success with someone else. To the outside world, it looked like he'd been right all along. But Isabella had kept her head down and focused on her children and her business. She'd known that eventually, the truth would matter more than the narrative. And now, standing in her penthouse with that invitation in her hand, she knew the moment had come. Dominic had invited her to his baby shower because he wanted one final victory. One final moment of rubbing her face in his new life, his new wife, his impending fatherhood. He wanted her to sit among their former friends, watching him celebrate everything she'd supposedly failed to give him. He wanted her small, diminished, defeated. He was about to get something very different. Isabella's phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "Please tell me you've changed your mind about this. Please tell me you're not actually taking my nieces and nephews into this viper's nest. This is insane, Izzy." Isabella typed back quickly. "I'm not taking them into anything. I'm showing them a beautiful garden on a sunny day. That Dominic happens to be there is incidental." The response was immediate. "Bullshit. This is revenge. You're using your kids as props in your revenge scheme." Isabella stared at that message for a long moment. Was that what this was? Was Maya right? She walked over to where her children were playing. Elijah had built a tower of blocks that Sebastian was threatening to knock down, while Lucas tried to mediate the conflict, and Sophia clapped her hands, delighted by the chaos. They were happy, healthy, completely unaware of the adult drama swirling around them. Was she wrong to bring them into this? She knelt down beside them, and immediately, 4 pairs of eyes turned to her with pure love and trust. Elijah abandoned his tower to hug her. "Mama pretty," he said, his vocabulary still limited but his meaning clear. The others echoed him, clustering around her, tiny hands touching her dress, her face, her hair. These children adored her, and she would do anything to protect them. But protecting them didn't mean hiding. It didn't mean letting Dominic's lies stand unchallenged. It meant showing them, as they grew, that their mother had faced cruelty and chosen strength. That she hadn't hidden from the man who tried to destroy her. That she'd walked back into the fire and emerged unburned because she knew her worth. "We're going to a party today," Isabella told them softly. "There will be lots of people and pretty flowers. Can you be good for Mama?" 4 heads nodded enthusiastically. They had no idea what was coming. Maybe that was for the best. Isabella stood and texted Maya back. "I'm not using them for revenge. I'm showing up as myself, as the woman I've become. That woman has 4 children. I'm not hiding them to make Dominic comfortable." She didn't wait for Maya's response. Instead, she gathered her children, helped Carmen get them into their custom-made shoes, tiny leather loafers for the boys, delicate Mary Janes for Sophia, and loaded them into her SUV. The drive to the Rosewood Garden estate took 45 minutes through downtown traffic. Isabella used the time to breathe, to center herself, to remember why she was doing this. Not for revenge. Not to hurt Dominic. But to close a chapter of her life that had been left open for too long. She needed him to see what he'd thrown away. She needed their former friends to see what real strength looked like. And she needed to prove to herself that she could walk into that garden and feel nothing but pride for the life she'd built. And hey, while you're here, if you haven't subscribed yet, I'd love to have you as part of the family. Go on, I'll wait. As they pulled up to the estate's entrance, Isabella saw the valet's eyes widen at the sight of her vehicle, a brand new Range Rover in midnight blue, another symbol of her success. The gardens beyond the entrance were already full of guests, the string quartet playing Mozart, champagne flutes glinting in the afternoon sun. It looked like something out of a magazine spread. Elegant. Expensive. Exactly like Dominic to turn a baby shower into a display of wealth and status. Isabella stepped out of the car first, and immediately felt the weight of eyes on her. Even from a distance, guests were starting to notice. The woman in the emerald gown who just arrived. Was that? No, it couldn't be. But it was. Isabella Reeves. The ex-wife. What was she doing here? Then Isabella opened the back door and helped Elijah out. Then Sebastian. Then Lucas. Then Sophia. 4 perfect children, clearly siblings, clearly hers. The whispers started immediately. Isabella heard fragments as she walked toward the garden entrance, the children holding her hands, 2 on each side. "Oh my God, are those? I heard she couldn't have. How is that possible? Did you see?" Carmen walked slightly behind them, ready to help with the children if needed, but Isabella had asked her to stay back for the entrance. This moment was hers. She walked through the garden gates like she was walking down a runway. Head high. Shoulders back. Every bit of insecurity she'd felt during her marriage to Dominic burned away in the heat of her certainty. She was no longer the woman Dominic had discarded. She was someone entirely new. Someone he'd unknowingly created by trying to destroy her. The string quartet faltered as she passed. Guests openly stared. Someone dropped a glass. Isabella heard it shatter on the stone pathway but didn't turn. She kept walking deeper into the garden, letting everyone see her children, see the undeniable truth that Dominic's entire narrative had been a lie. If she couldn't have children, what were these 4 perfect beings holding her hands? And there, on the main terrace, exactly where she'd expected him to be, stood Dominic Laurent. He was in the middle of a speech, microphone in hand, his pregnant wife Vanessa beside him in a flowing white dress that emphasized her belly. They looked like they'd stepped out of a fairy tale, the handsome prince and his beautiful pregnant princess, celebrating their impending bundle of joy. The perfect family. The perfect life. Everything Dominic had always wanted. Then Dominic's eyes found Isabella, and she watched in real time as the color drained from his face. The microphone slipped in his hand. His mouth opened but no sound came out. Vanessa, following her husband's gaze, turned to see what had caused such a reaction. Her expression shifted from confusion to curiosity to something like understanding as she took in the sight of Isabella and the quadruplets. The entire garden seemed to hold its breath. 200 guests frozen in a moment of collective shock. The string quartet had stopped playing entirely. Even the children seemed to sense something significant was happening, staying close to their mother, looking up at her for reassurance. Isabella gave them a smile, squeezed their hands gently, and kept walking toward the terrace. Toward Dominic. Toward the moment she'd been building toward for 3 years. This was it. The beginning of the end. Or perhaps, the end of the beginning. Either way, Isabella Reeves was done hiding. Done being small. Done letting Dominic Lawrence lies define her story. Today, in this garden that held so many of her painful memories, she was going to reclaim her narrative. And she was going to do it with grace, dignity, and 4 living proof points that she had never been the problem. The real story was just beginning. To understand the earthquake that was about to shake the Rosewood Garden estate, you need to understand the woman at its center. Not the Isabella who was walking through that garden with her head held high, and her children by her side. But the Isabella who had been broken 3 years ago. The one who had signed divorce papers with shaking hands. The one who had believed, truly believed, that she was defective, unworthy, less than. Because that woman, the before version of Isabella Reeves, was the foundation upon which everything else was built. Isabella had met Dominic Laurent at a tech industry conference in San Francisco 9 years ago. She'd been 28, working as a junior marketing associate for a mid-sized firm, attending the conference to network and learn about emerging trends in digital marketing. He'd been 32, already making waves as the founder of a promising tech startup that would eventually make him a multimillionaire. Their meeting had been almost cinematic. She'd been standing at the refreshment table during a break between sessions, reaching for a bottle of water at the exact moment he reached for the same one. Their hands had touched. They'd laughed. He'd offered her the water and grabbed a different one for himself. Then he'd asked if she wanted to grab coffee after the next session. She'd said yes. The coffee had turned into dinner. Dinner had turned into a late-night walk along the Embarcadero, talking about everything and nothing, their childhoods, their ambitions, their fears, their dreams. Dominic had been charming in a way that felt effortless. He'd made her laugh with self-deprecating stories about his early business failures. He'd listened intently when she talked about her ideas for innovative marketing campaigns. He made her feel seen, valued, interesting. By the time he'd kissed her goodnight outside her hotel, Isabella had felt like she was in a romantic movie. This was it. This was the one. Their relationship had moved quickly after that. Despite living in different cities, Isabella in Chicago, Dominic in Seattle, they'd made it work. Weekend flights. Late-night video calls. Text messages throughout the day. Dominic had pursued her with an intensity that had been intoxicating. Flowers delivered to her office. Surprise visits when he had business near Chicago. Weekend getaways to places she'd always wanted to visit. Within 6 months, he'd asked her to move to Seattle. Within a year, they were engaged. Within 2 years, they were married in a ceremony that had been featured in regional lifestyle magazines. The up-and-coming tech entrepreneur and his beautiful bride, a fairy tale romance for the modern age. The early years of their marriage had been happy, or at least Isabella had thought they were. Dominic's company was growing rapidly, which meant long hours and frequent travel, but Isabella had understood. She'd been building her own career, working her way up to senior marketing manager at a Seattle-based firm. They'd bought a beautiful home in an upscale neighborhood. They'd hosted dinner parties for Dominic's business associates. They'd taken exotic vacations. They talked about their future, the children they'd have someday, the life they were building together. Everything had seemed perfect. The cracks had started showing around year 3, when they'd begun trying to conceive. At first, it had seemed like a fun new adventure. No more birth control. Sex whenever they wanted without worry. The excitement of maybe getting pregnant. But months had passed without that positive test, and slowly, subtly, things had shifted. Dominic had started making comments about really trying, instead of just letting it happen. He'd suggested Isabella track her cycles more carefully. He'd shown up at home with ovulation predictor kits and fertility supplements. The spontaneity had disappeared, replaced by scheduled intercourse and mounting pressure. By year 4, trying to conceive had become a second job. Isabella had read every book, joined every online forum, tried every holistic remedy suggested by fellow women on the fertility journey. She'd eliminated alcohol, caffeine, gluten, dairy, anything that might possibly interfere with conception. She'd started acupuncture, meditation, yoga. She tracked her basal body temperature religiously every morning before even getting out of bed. She'd watched her cervical mucus like a scientist studying a specimen. She'd turned her body into a project, trying to optimize every possible variable to achieve pregnancy. And Dominic had become increasingly distant. The loving husband who'd once surprised her with flowers had been replaced by a man who saw sex as a means to an end. He'd stopped touching her except during her fertile window. He'd stopped complimenting her, except to say things like, "You look healthy," which felt more like an assessment of her breeding potential than actual attraction. He'd stopped asking about her day, her work, her thoughts. She'd become, to him, a vessel that was failing to perform its function. The IVF years had been worse. Isabella had been the one to suggest it after 2 years of failed natural attempts. Dominic had agreed immediately, almost eagerly, like this was the solution he'd been waiting for. They'd met with Dr. Morrison, the fertility specialist who came highly recommended. They'd undergone all the testing, blood work, ultrasounds, semen analysis for Dominic, everything. Isabella had been pronounced perfectly healthy. Excellent ovarian reserve. No blocked tubes. No endometriosis. No PCOS. Everything looked great. The doctor had been optimistic. Sometimes, he'd said, couples just need a little help. IVF would give them that help. What Isabella hadn't known, what she wouldn't discover until long after her divorce, was that during that initial testing, Dominic's semen analysis had come back with concerning results. Low sperm count. Poor motility. Abnormal morphology. Results that indicated severe male factor infertility, and made natural conception extremely unlikely. Dr. Morrison had delivered these results to Dominic privately, as was standard practice. And Dominic, instead of sharing them with his wife, had paid the doctor a substantial sum to never mention them in Isabella's presence. He'd instructed Dr. Morrison to frame the IVF as a way to optimize their chances, not as a necessity due to his fertility issues. And Dr. Morrison, corrupted by money and misplaced loyalty to his male patient, had complied. So Isabella had gone through 12 rounds of IVF believing that her body was the problem. She'd injected herself with hormones that made her bloated, emotional, and uncomfortable. She'd endured egg retrievals under anesthesia, waking up groggy and sore. She'd waited through the agonizing 2-week periods between transfer and testing, her hope and anxiety building with each passing day. And when each round failed, she'd blamed herself. What was wrong with her? Why couldn't her body do this one simple thing that women had been doing for millennia? Why was she broken? Dominic had blamed her too, though he'd done it subtly at first. Comments about how she was too stressed, too focused on work, not taking care of herself properly. Suggestions that maybe if she tried harder, thought more positively, wanted it more, it would happen. Then, as the failures mounted, his criticism became less subtle. He'd started making comments at dinner parties about how some women just aren't cut out for motherhood. He'd made jokes about firing the factory if it couldn't produce. He'd started staying late at the office more often, going on business trips that seemed unnecessary, finding excuses to not be home. The emotional intimacy that had once defined their relationship had evaporated, leaving behind a cold arrangement where they lived parallel lives under the same roof. By the time they'd reached the 12th IVF round, Isabella had been a shell of herself. She'd gained weight from the hormones and stress. She'd lost interest in her work, just going through the motions. She'd stopped seeing friends because she couldn't bear their questions or, worse, their pity. She'd stopped looking at herself in mirrors because she hated what she saw, a failure, a disappointment, a woman whose body couldn't do the one thing it was supposedly designed to do. She'd been depressed, though she hadn't recognized it at the time. She just thought this was what infertility did to you. It broke you. By the way, if you're listening and feeling this story already, you might as well subscribe. Don't be shy, join us. The day the 12th test came back negative, Dominic had barely reacted. He'd looked at her with something like disgust and said, "I guess that's it then." She'd asked what he meant. He'd said they needed to talk. That night, he'd taken her to their favorite restaurant, or rather, what had been their favorite restaurant back when they'd been happy. He'd ordered an expensive bottle of wine that only he drank, since she'd still been avoiding alcohol in case they wanted to try again. And then, between the appetizer and the main course, he'd handed her an envelope. Inside were divorce papers. Isabella had stared at them, unable to process what she was seeing. "What is this?" she'd asked, though of course she'd known. Dominic had explained calmly, rationally, like he was delivering a business presentation. He tried to make it work. He'd been patient for 7 years. But he needed children. He needed a legacy. He needed to feel like a real man, and being married to a woman who couldn't give him children made him feel like less than that. He'd already consulted with lawyers. The settlement was generous. She'd keep her car, get a substantial financial payout, have time to find a new place to live. He thought they could keep things civil. Maybe even stay friends. Isabella had sat there, the divorce papers in her shaking hands, and felt her entire world collapse. 7 years of marriage. 5 years of trying to have a baby. 12 rounds of IVF. Thousands of injections. Hundreds of pills. Countless tears. All of it leading to this moment, sitting in a restaurant surrounded by happy couples, while her husband informed her that she was being traded in for a newer model. She'd asked him if there was someone else. He'd had the audacity to look offended. "This isn't about anyone else," he'd said. "This is about you not being able to give me what I need." She'd asked him if he'd ever loved her. He'd said of course he had, but love wasn't enough when fundamental incompatibilities existed. She'd asked him how he could be so cruel. He'd said he wasn't being cruel, he was being honest, and wasn't honesty what she'd always claimed to value. Isabella had signed the papers that night, her signature blurred by tears. She'd been too broken to fight. Too tired to argue. Too convinced of her own worthlessness to believe she deserved anything better. She'd moved out of their home within a week, taking only her personal belongings and leaving behind everything they'd built together. She'd found a small apartment in a different neighborhood, far from the life she'd known. And she'd spent the next 3 months in a fog of grief and depression, barely functioning, certainly not thriving. The social fallout had been brutal. Their divorce had become gossip fodder in their social circle. Dominic had controlled the narrative masterfully, positioning himself as the victim of a tragic situation. Poor Dominic, married to a woman who couldn't give him children. Poor Dominic, who'd tried everything to help her. Poor Dominic, who'd been patient for years but finally had to make the difficult decision to move on. Isabella had been cast as the tragic figure, the barren wife, the woman whose body had failed her, the cautionary tale about what happens when you can't fulfill your basic biological function. Some friends had reached out initially, offering sympathy and support. But that support had evaporated when Dominic made it clear that maintaining a friendship with Isabella meant social exile from his circle. And since Dominic's circle included the most influential people in Seattle's tech and business communities, people who controlled access to the best parties, the most important networking events, the country club memberships, the charity boards, most people had chosen accordingly. Isabella had been systematically erased from the life she'd spent 7 years building. The isolation had been devastating. Isabella had found herself alone in her small apartment, no husband, no friends, no social life, no identity beyond. Dominic Lawrence's ex-wife who couldn't have children. She'd stopped going to work regularly, calling in sick or working from home whenever possible. She'd stopped eating properly, surviving on delivery food and wine. She'd stopped sleeping through the night, instead lying awake replaying every moment of her marriage, every failed IVF cycle, every cruel comment, trying to figure out where she'd gone wrong. It was her sister Maya who'd finally intervened. Maya, 2 years younger than Isabella, had been living in Portland working as a corporate attorney. She'd watched her sister's decline with increasing alarm, and one day, she'd simply shown up at Isabella's apartment, let herself in with the spare key, and refused to leave until Isabella agreed to get help. Real help. Not just sympathetic texts from acquaintances, but actual professional support. Maya had helped Isabella find Dr. Chin, a therapist who specialized in trauma and depression. She'd accompanied Isabella to the first few appointments, sitting in the waiting room as moral support. She'd helped Isabella establish a routine, wake up at the same time every day, shower, eat breakfast, go outside for at least 30 minutes, do one productive thing. Small steps. Baby steps. But steps nonetheless toward becoming functional again. If you're watching this and haven't subscribed yet, don't break my heart like that. Tap the button. Let's keep growing together. And slowly, painfully, Isabella had started to heal. The therapy had helped her understand that she'd been in an emotionally abusive marriage, that Dominic's treatment of her had been a form of psychological warfare, that her worth as a human being had nothing to do with her fertility or any other single characteristic. She'd started processing the grief of her lost marriage, the anger at Dominic's betrayal, the shame she'd internalized about her supposed failure. She'd started, gradually, to remember who she'd been before Dominic: ambitious, creative, funny, strong. That woman was still in there somewhere, buried under layers of trauma and self-hatred, but she could be recovered. For months after the divorce, Isabella had been in Dr. Chen's office for their weekly session when her phone had rung. She'd normally silenced it during therapy, but she'd been expecting an important call about a potential freelance project, one of her first attempts to rebuild her career. She'd glanced at the screen and seen it was Dr. Morrison, her fertility doctor. She'd almost declined the call. What could he possibly have to say to her now? But something had made her answer. What Dr. Morrison had told her that day had changed everything. He'd called because his conscience had finally gotten the better of him. He'd been carrying the guilt of his deception for years, but seeing Isabella's name in the news, there had been a small article about the divorce in the business section, framing it as tech entrepreneur Dominic Laurent splits from wife. Had broken something in him. He needed to confess. To tell her the truth that Dominic had paid him to hide. The male factor infertility. The severely compromised sperm parameters. The near impossibility of natural conception. All of it had been Dominic's issue, not hers. Every single IVF failure could be attributed to the poor quality of Dominic's sperm, not to any deficiency in Isabella's eggs or uterus. She'd been perfect. Healthy. Capable. And she'd been gaslit for 5 years into believing she was broken. Isabella had sat in Dr. Chen's office, phone pressed to her ear, as Dr. Morrison explained everything. The initial test results. Dominic's payment to keep them secret. The instructions to never mention male factor infertility in Isabella's presence. The additional payments over the years to maintain the deception. Dr. Morrison had even sent her copies of the test results, the payment records, everything. He'd said he knew this couldn't undo the damage, but she deserved to know the truth. Then he told her he was retiring from practice and moving to a different state, unable to continue in a profession where he'd compromised his ethics so severely. After the call ended, Isabella had looked at Dr. Chin and said, "It was never me." And then she'd started laughing. Not happy laughter, hysterical laughter, the kind that's almost indistinguishable from crying. Because the revelation was both liberating and enraging. Liberating because she wasn't broken, had never been broken, had spent years hating herself for a problem that didn't exist. Enraging because Dominic had known this, had deliberately let her suffer, had destroyed her self-worth to protect his own ego. The anger that Isabella had felt in that moment was unlike anything she'd experienced before. It was white-hot, all-consuming, demanding action. She'd wanted to go to Dominic immediately, throw the test results in his face, scream at him for what he'd done. She'd wanted to tell everyone they knew, to expose him as the manipulative liar he was. She'd wanted revenge in its most visceral form. But Dr. Chin had helped her work through that rage productively. They talked about the difference between justice and revenge, between asserting her truth and descending to Dominic's level. They'd discussed what Isabella actually wanted from her life going forward. Did she want to spend her energy on destroying Dominic, or on building something new? The sessions over the following weeks had been intense, working through the complicated emotions of betrayal and vindication, grief and liberation, anger and hope. And gradually, Isabella had arrived at a decision. She didn't want to destroy Dominic. She wanted to become someone he could never touch again. Someone so successful, so happy, so complete that his opinion became irrelevant. That was the truest revenge, not bringing him down, but rising so far above him that he became inconsequential. But she still wanted children. That hadn't changed. If anything, discovering that her fertility was intact had reignited that desire. She'd spent 5 years being told her body was defective. Now she knew it wasn't. She wanted to prove it, not to Dominic or anyone else, but to herself. She wanted to reclaim that part of her life that had been stolen by lies. So Isabella had done something radical. She'd decided to have a baby on her own. The decision had been terrifying at first. Single motherhood was hard. She had no partner to help with late-night feedings, no one to share the responsibilities. She was still rebuilding her career and her life. Was this insane? But the more she thought about it, the more it felt right. She didn't need a partner to have a child. She needed sperm, medical assistance, financial stability, and emotional support, and she had access to all of those things. So why not? She'd researched sperm banks with the same thoroughness she'd once applied to marketing campaigns. She'd reviewed hundreds of donor profiles, looking at genetic histories, educational backgrounds, physical characteristics, personality assessments. She'd finally selected a donor who seemed perfect on paper, healthy, intelligent, creative, with no hereditary health issues in his family line. She'd purchased several vials of his sperm and scheduled an IVF appointment with a new fertility clinic, one where Dominic's money and influence couldn't reach. The IVF process had been completely different this time. Without Dominic's presence, without the weight of his disappointment and blame, it had felt like a medical procedure rather than a referendum on her worth. The doctor had been optimistic from the start. Isabella's age was still on her side, her ovarian reserve was excellent, and there were no male factor issues to complicate things. They'd retrieved 18 eggs, 14 of which fertilized successfully, 12 of which made it to the blastocyst stage suitable for transfer. They'd transferred 2 embryos, as was standard practice for someone Isabella's age. And then she'd waited through the familiar 2-week window, but this time, the waiting felt different. Not desperate or anxious, but hopeful in a way that felt sustainable. Whatever happened, she'd be okay. She'd survived Dominic. She'd survived this too. The positive pregnancy test had arrived 10 days after transfer. Isabella had taken it alone in her bathroom, hands shaking, half expecting to see that single line she'd seen so many times before. But there had been 2 lines. Clear, unmistakable, real. She'd taken 3 more tests just to be sure, and all of them had shown the same result. Positive. Pregnant. Finally. She'd gone to the clinic for a blood test to confirm, and the beta-HCG numbers had been exceptionally high. Higher than expected for this stage of pregnancy. The nurse had mentioned that sometimes high numbers indicated twins. Isabella had been thrilled at the possibility. After years of trying for 1 baby, having 2 would feel like winning the lottery. The ultrasound at 6 weeks had shown something even more unexpected. Not 2 gestational sacs, but 4. Quadruplets. The doctor had looked at the screen, counted again, then looked at Isabella with something like awe. "This is extremely rare," he'd said. "With 2 embryo transfer, we sometimes see twins. But quadruplets, this means both embryos split into identical twins. The odds are about 1 in 700,000. Isabella had stared at that ultrasound screen, seeing 4 tiny flickers of heartbeats, and felt the universe had decided to make up for lost time. Dominic had divorced her for not being able to give him 1 child. Now she was carrying 4. The poetic justice was almost too perfect. Of course, the pregnancy had been complicated. Carrying quadruplets was considered high risk. Isabella had been put on modified bed rest at 20 weeks, then complete bed rest at 26 weeks. She'd had to hire help to bring her meals, help her to the bathroom, help her with everything. She'd attended every doctor's appointment connected to monitors, getting ultrasounds every 2 weeks to make sure all 4 babies were growing appropriately. There had been scares, threatened preterm labor at 28 weeks, gestational diabetes, severe anemia. But Isabella had endured all of it with the determination born of years of wanting this. During those months of bed rest, unable to do much physically, Isabella had done something else. She'd started a business. She'd always been talented at marketing, had always had ideas that her employers had underappreciated. Now, with time and motivation, she'd started reaching out to former colleagues and contacts, offering freelance marketing consultancy services. She'd video called with potential clients from her bed, presented strategies while hooked up to contraction monitors, negotiated contracts between doctor's appointments. And miraculously it had worked. She'd landed 3 major clients before her children were even born. Companies that had seen her portfolio, heard her ideas, and didn't care that she was running her consultancy from a hospital bed while massively pregnant. They cared about results, and Isabella delivered results. At 34 weeks, with all 4 babies measuring healthy and well-developed, Isabella's doctors had scheduled a C-section. It had been a major production, multiple obstetricians, neonatologists, nurses, an anesthesiologist, pediatricians on standby for each baby. Isabella had been terrified going into that operating room. Not of the surgery, but of the enormity of what was about to happen. She was about to become a mother. To 4 children. At once. With no partner. What had she been thinking? But then they'd lifted that first baby out, Elijah, weighing 5 pounds 2 ounces, and placed him briefly on her chest before whisking him to the warmer. Then Sebastian, 4 pounds 14 ounces. Then Lucas, 5 pounds exactly. And finally Sophia, the smallest at 4 pounds 8 ounces, but with the loudest cry. Isabella had heard all 4 of her children crying in that operating room, a cacophony of new life, and she'd cried too. From pain, from joy, from relief, from overwhelming love. She'd done it. Against all odds, after everything she'd been through, she'd become a mother. The first year had been a blur of impossible logistics. 4 babies needing to eat every 3 hours. 4 babies needing diaper changes. 4 babies having sleep regressions at different times. 4 babies learning to crawl, then walk, then talk. Isabella had hired help, she'd had to, there was no way to manage it alone. A night nurse for the first 6 months had saved her sanity. Then Carmen, a full-time nanny, had joined them when Isabella had gone back to work full-time. Because yes, she'd gone back to work. Her consultancy had grown despite the chaos of new motherhood. Or perhaps because of it, Isabella had been forced to become incredibly efficient with her time, to delegate effectively, to build systems that worked without her constant oversight. Within a year, Reeves Marketing Solutions had 15 employees and a client roster that included some of Seattle's hottest startups. Within 2 years, they'd expanded to include Fortune 500 companies. And now, at 3 years post-divorce, her company was valued at over $50 million. Isabella had rebuilt her life from ashes. She'd gone from a broken, discarded wife to a successful entrepreneur and mother of 4. She'd proven that Dominic's narrative about her had been a lie. She'd proven that she was never the problem. And she'd done it all without any need for revenge, without publicly exposing Dominic, without trying to hurt him the way he'd hurt her. Until now. Because the invitation to Dominic's baby shower had changed something. For 3 years, Isabella had taken the high road. She'd stayed silent about the truth of their marriage. She'd not exposed his fertility issues or his lies. She'd not told their mutual friends what kind of man he really was. She'd simply disappeared from his life and built something new. Before we go on, quick question, are you subscribed? If not, go ahead and fix that for me. I promise, I'll keep the stories coming. But inviting her to his baby shower? That was a declaration of war. That was Dominic saying he still had power over her, could still hurt her, still wanted to rub his new life in her face. He'd chosen their venue deliberately. He'd sent that invitation knowing it would hurt her. He'd planned this entire event as a final humiliation. He had no idea what he'd actually done. He'd given her the perfect opportunity to show everyone the truth. Not through words or accusations, but through simple presence. She would walk into that garden with her 4 children, and every single lie he told would crumble. This wasn't revenge. This was revelation. And as Isabella had stood in front of that mirror this morning, children playing behind her, invitation in hand, she'd felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not anger. Not pain. But certainty. Absolute, unshakable certainty that she was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was supposed to do. Dominic Laurent had divorced her because she was broken. Today, she was going to show him what broken really looked like. And it wasn't her. The moment Isabella stepped fully into the garden, the atmosphere shifted so dramatically it was almost tangible. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips. The string quartet, sensing something momentous was occurring, let their music trail off into uncomfortable silence. 200 guests, dressed in their finest spring attire, turned as one to stare at the woman in the emerald gown and the 4 perfect children holding her hands. Isabella didn't rush. She understood the value of a moment, the power of allowing people to fully absorb what they were seeing. She walked slowly along the stone pathway that wound through the garden, her children matching her pace with the natural adaptability of toddlers accustomed to following their mother's lead. Each step was deliberate, measured, giving every guest time to notice not just her presence but every detail, the expensive cut of her gown, the confident set of her shoulders, the way her children looked up at her with complete trust and adoration, the undeniable evidence that everything they'd been told about Isabella Reeves had been a lie. She could feel the weight of their stares, hear the whispers starting like a wave moving through the crowd. "Is that Isabella? Oh my God, those children! I thought she couldn't. How is this possible? Did you know about this?" Dominic never said. The voices overlapped, creating a buzz of shock and confusion that was better than any revenge Isabella could have planned. She wasn't doing anything except existing. But her existence, in this moment, in this place, with these children, was enough to shatter every narrative Dominic had carefully constructed. Carmen walked a few steps behind, ready to assist with the children if needed, but Isabella had asked her to maintain that distance for the entrance. This moment needed to be hers alone. Well, hers and her children's. Elijah, her eldest by 3 minutes, squeezed her hand and asked in his small voice, "Mama, why everyone looking?" Isabella glanced down at him, seeing her own features reflected in his face, the same dark eyes, the same stubborn chin, and smiled. "Because we look very nice today, sweetie. Don't worry about them." Sebastian, ever the performer, waved at a cluster of guests who were openly staring. Several of them, shocked into automatic politeness, waved back. Lucas, her quiet observer, studied the garden with intense curiosity, pointing at flowers and fountains, seemingly unaware of the drama his presence was causing. And Sophia, her only daughter, had spotted a butterfly and was tugging on Isabella's hand, wanting to chase it. They were just children, innocent and beautiful, with no understanding that their mere existence was detonating their mother's ex-husband's carefully crafted world. Isabella's eyes scanned the crowd, recognizing faces she hadn't seen in 3 years. There was Patricia Chandler, who'd been in Isabella's book club until the divorce, who'd stopped returning her calls the moment Dominic had made it clear that choosing Isabella meant social exile. Patricia looked away quickly when their eyes met, her face flushing with what might have been shame. There was Marcus Chin, no relation to Isabella's therapist, Dominic's business partner, who'd sat through countless dinners where Dominic had blamed Isabella for their fertility issues, who never once questioned Dominic's version of events. He was staring at Isabella's children with visible confusion, clearly doing the math in his head about timelines and possibilities. There was Elizabeth Grant, the Society columnist who'd written a sympathetic piece about Dominic's divorce, painting him as a man trapped in a marriage that couldn't give him what he needed. Elizabeth's eyes were wide, and Isabella could practically see her mentally composing her next column. This was a story too juicy to pass up. There was Jonathan Reeves, no relation to Isabella despite the shared last name, who'd been Dominic's lawyer during the divorce, who'd delivered the settlement papers with a smug expression that suggested he thought Isabella should be grateful for Dominic's generosity. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. And scattered throughout the garden were dozens of other faces, people Isabella had once considered friends, colleagues, acquaintances. People who'd attended her wedding, celebrated her anniversaries, expressed sympathy during her fertility struggles. People who'd then, almost universally, chosen Dominic's side when the marriage ended. People who'd believed his narrative without question, who'd written Isabella out of their lives with barely a second thought. Now they were all seeing the truth, whether they wanted to or not. But Isabella wasn't looking at them anymore. Her gaze had found its target, standing on the main terrace about 50 feet ahead. Dominic Laurent, frozen in the middle of what must have been a speech about family and legacy, and the upcoming arrival of his first child. The microphone hung loose in his hand, forgotten. His face had gone from its normal tan to a sickly pale color that made him look ill. His mouth was slightly open, as if he'd stopped mid-word and couldn't remember how to continue. His eyes were locked on Isabella, or more specifically, on the 4 children walking beside her. Next to him stood Vanessa, his second wife, visibly pregnant in a flowing white dress that had probably cost thousands of dollars. Vanessa was 26 to Isabella's 37, a former model who'd been gracing lifestyle magazines since she was 18. She was beautiful in that classic, almost artificial way: perfect skin, perfect hair, perfect teeth, perfect figure despite the pregnancy. She'd been Dominic's trophy, his proof that he'd upgraded, that he'd found a woman who could give him what Isabella couldn't. Except Isabella had just walked in with proof that she could give him exactly what he'd claimed she couldn't. Times 4. Vanessa was staring at Isabella with a mixture of confusion and dawning realization. She'd been told a story about Dominic's first marriage, the tragic tale of a woman who couldn't have children, whose obsession with fertility had made her impossible to live with, whose mental health had deteriorated until Dominic had no choice but to leave. Vanessa had believed that story because why wouldn't she? Dominic was charming, successful, seemingly honest. And Vanessa had gotten pregnant almost immediately after their marriage, which had seemed to confirm Dominic's version of events. If his new wife could conceive so easily, clearly the problem had been his first wife. Except now his first wife was standing in the garden with quadruplets who couldn't be more than 2 years old. The timeline of that was impossible to ignore. Isabella had conceived these children during or shortly after her divorce from Dominic. Which meant either she'd been having an affair during their marriage, something Vanessa clearly hadn't been told about, or the fertility issues had never been Isabella's to begin with. Isabella could see all of this processing across Vanessa's face in real time. The confusion. The doubt. The first whispers of understanding that maybe she hadn't been told the whole truth about her husband's past. Vanessa's hand moved unconsciously to her pregnant belly, a protective gesture, and her eyes met Isabella's across the garden. In that moment, there was a flash of something between them. Not quite sympathy, but recognition. 2 women who'd both been in Dominic's orbit, both shaped by his narratives, both discovering that what they'd been told might not match reality. Isabella took a breath and continued walking toward the terrace. She wasn't doing this to hurt Vanessa. Whatever anger she felt toward Dominic, his current wife was largely innocent in this. A young woman who'd fallen for a charismatic older man and believed what he told her. But Vanessa needed to see this. Everyone needed to see this. Because Isabella was done being the villain in Dominic's story. As she approached the terrace, other guests parted to make way, creating a clear path between Isabella and the couple celebrating their baby shower. The silence was profound now. Even the children seemed to sense something important was happening and had quieted, staying close to their mother. Isabella climbed the 3 shallow steps to the terrace, her heels clicking on the stone, each sound abnormally loud in the hush. She stopped about 10 feet from Dominic and Vanessa. Close enough to speak to them without shouting, far enough to maintain her dignity in space. For a long moment, no one spoke. The entire garden held its breath. Isabella looked at Dominic, really looked at him for the first time in 3 years. He'd aged, she noticed. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, gray threading through his dark hair at the temples. He was still handsome. Dominic had always been handsome, but there was something harder in his face now, something that success and power had sharpened into edges. Settle in, get comfortable, and if you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and do that. You're safe here. His eyes moved from Isabella's face to her children, then back to her face, then to the children again, as if he couldn't quite process what he was seeing. She watched him count, 1, 2, 3, 4, saw the moment he registered that they appeared to be the same age, saw the confusion, then the understanding, then something that might have been panic flash across his features. "Hello, Dominic," Isabella said, her voice calm and clear, pitched to carry to the nearby guests but not to shout. "Thank you for the invitation." Dominic's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The microphone slipped from his hand and hit the stone terrace with a harsh feedback screech that made several guests wince. He didn't seem to notice. He was still staring at Isabella's children like they were apparitions that might disappear if he blinked. It was Vanessa who found her voice first. "Isabella?" she said, the name tentative, as if she wasn't quite sure she had it right. We didn't think you'd come." Isabella turned her attention to Dominic's pregnant wife, and her expression softened slightly. "I almost didn't," she admitted. "It seemed like this might be uncomfortable for everyone. But then I thought, why should I hide? Why should I stay away from a celebration just because it might be awkward?" She gestured to her children. "These are my babies. Elijah, Sebastian, Lucas, and Sophia. We don't get out to fancy garden parties very often, and I thought they'd enjoy seeing the flowers." It was a perfectly reasonable explanation delivered in a perfectly pleasant tone. And it was complete bullshit. Everyone in that garden knew Isabella hadn't come to look at flowers. She'd come to detonate a bomb. But the casual way she delivered it, as if this really were just a normal social call, made it even more devastating. She wasn't here to make a scene. She was just here. Existing. Being the woman Dominic had said didn't exist. Vanessa was still trying to process. Her eyes moved over Isabella's children, taking in their matching outfits, their obvious bond with their mother, their comfortable ease in what must be a strange environment. They're beautiful," Vanessa said, and it sounded genuine. "How old are they?" 18 months, Isabella replied. She watched Dominic's face as she said it, saw him doing the math. 18 months old meant conceived about 27 months ago. Their divorce had been finalized 3 years ago, had been in process for about 6 months before that. Which meant Isabella had gotten pregnant approximately 3 to 6 months after their divorce was finalized. Very shortly after the marriage that had failed to produce children. With quadruplets. 18 months, Dominic repeated, his voice hoarse, finding speech at last. How? Isabella tilted her head, as if confused by the question. How did I have them? The usual way, Dominic. Well, with medical assistance, obviously. Quadruplets don't usually happen naturally. She paused, letting that sink in. Actually, I should thank you. If you hadn't divorced me, I might never have realized that I could have children. All those years we tried, and I thought it was my fault. Turns out, I just needed different circumstances. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Different circumstances. Not a different body. Not a medical miracle. Just different circumstances. Anyone with half a brain could read between those lines. The problem had never been Isabella. It had been something else. Someone else. Dominic's face was cycling through emotions too quickly to track. Shock, confusion, anger, fear, something that might have been guilt. You used a donor, he said, and it wasn't a question. He was trying to establish facts, to regain control of the narrative. You went to a sperm bank. I did, Isabella confirmed easily. She saw no reason to hide it. Her children were donor-conceived, and she wasn't ashamed of that. After the divorce, I discovered some information about my fertility. Information I hadn't had access to during our marriage. It turned out that my eggs were perfectly healthy. I just needed viable sperm to fertilize them. So I found some. The word viable landed like a slap. Several guests close enough to hear the conversation gasped or murmured to each other. Dominic's face flushed dark red. What are you implying? He demanded, his voice rising. Are you suggesting that I'm not suggesting anything. Isabella interrupted, her voice still calm. I'm simply stating facts. I went through 12 rounds of IVF with you, Dominic. 12 times we tried and failed. Then, 3 months after our divorce, I tried once with donor sperm. 1 time. And I conceived quadruplets. Draw your own conclusions. The murmurs around them grew louder. People were definitely drawing conclusions, and those conclusions were not favorable to Dominic. His carefully constructed image, the successful man who'd been trapped in a marriage with an infertile woman, who'd finally found happiness with a new wife who could give him children, was cracking like thin ice. Because if Isabella had conceived immediately with a donor, what did that say about their 12 failed IVF cycles? Vanessa's face had gone pale. Her hand was pressed against her pregnant belly, and her eyes were moving between her husband and his ex-wife with growing alarm. "Dominic?" she said quietly. "What is she talking about?" "Nothing," Dominic snapped. She's trying to cause drama. This is exactly the kind of thing Isabella would do, show up uninvited and try to." "I was invited," Isabella said mildly, pulling the gold-embossed invitation from her small clutched purse and holding it up. "See? Join us in celebrating new life. I thought it was a lovely gesture. Although I'll admit, I was a bit surprised you chose this venue. The Rosewood Garden Estate. Where we got engaged, remember, Dominic? Where we celebrated our first anniversary? Where we'd planned to renew our vows before. She let the sentence trail off, but the point had been made. Dominic hadn't just invited his ex-wife to his baby shower. He'd invited her to a venue loaded with memories of their marriage, of the life they'd built together, of the promises they'd made. It was a deliberate choice, designed to hurt her. Everyone in the garden could see that now. "I think you should leave," Dominic said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "This is inappropriate. You're making everyone uncomfortable." Isabella glanced around at the assembled guests, many of whom were still staring in fascination. "Am I? I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to cause any discomfort. I just thought." She turned back to Dominic, and her expression hardened slightly. "Actually, you know what? You're right. This is uncomfortable. Standing here, in this garden, looking at you and remembering everything you said to me. How you told me I was broken. How you blamed me for 5 years of failed conception. How you made me feel worthless because my body wouldn't cooperate. How you divorced me and told everyone it was because I couldn't give you children. And now I'm standing here with 4 children, Dominic. 4. What do you suppose that means?" The silence was absolute. No one was even pretending not to listen anymore. This was the kind of confrontation that would be gossiped about for years, and everyone wanted to hear every word. Dominic looked like he wanted to respond, but what could he say? Anything he said would be an admission of something. If he claimed the fertility issues had been hers, she could produce medical evidence to the contrary. If he admitted they'd been his entire narrative collapsed. He was trapped, and he knew it. His mouth opened and closed a few times, searching for words that wouldn't come. It was Vanessa who spoke next, her voice small but steady. "Isabella, I think there's been some confusion. Dominic told me that you and he had fertility issues, but that they were," he said. She trailed off, looking at her husband with something like pleading in her eyes. "Dominic, what did you tell me exactly?" And there it was. The moment Dominic had to choose between maintaining his lie to his current wife, or admitting the truth in front of 200 witnesses. Isabella watched him struggle with it, saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. If he admitted the truth, he'd be exposed as a liar to everyone here. If he maintained the lie, he'd have to gaslight Vanessa in front of a crowd that was already doubting him. Before Dominic could answer, Isabella made a decision. She pulled out her phone, scrolled to a folder she'd labeled "Truth," and held it out toward Vanessa. "These are medical records from our fertility treatments, including test results that were kept from me during our marriage. I think you should look at them." Vanessa took the phone with shaking hands. Isabella watched her scroll through the documents. The semen analysis results showing severe male factor infertility. The emails between Dominic and Dr. Morrison about keeping the information from Isabella. The payment records. All of it documented, undeniable, damning. Vanessa's face went through a series of changes as she read: confusion, understanding, disbelief, and finally, a kind of cold fury. "You lied to me," Vanessa said, looking up at Dominic. "It wasn't a question. You told me she was the one with fertility problems. You said she was obsessed with getting pregnant, and it made her crazy. You said you tried everything to help her but she just couldn't conceive. But this—" she held up the phone. "This says the problem was you. That you knew it was you. That you hid it from her and let her think she was broken." Dominic reached for Vanessa's arm. "It's more complicated than that. You don't understand the context." Vanessa jerked away from his touch. Don't touch me right now." She turned to Isabella, and there were tears in her eyes. "How long did you not know?" 5 years, Isabella said quietly. 5 years of thinking I was defective. Of hating my body. Of enduring his criticism and blame. I didn't find out the truth until 3 months after our divorce, when the doctor who'd kept his secret finally told me." Vanessa's hand went to her pregnant belly again, but this time the gesture looked different. Protective, yes, but also uncertain. She swallowed hard. "Is this baby even?" "Yes," Dominic said quickly, desperately. "Of course it is. I had treatment. And it's mine, Vanessa. The baby is mine." Isabella could see the doubt in Vanessa's eyes. The damage was done. Even if the baby was biologically Dominic's, Vanessa would never again trust him the way she had before. The foundation of their marriage had just been revealed as built on lies. Isabella looked at Dominic, and for a moment she felt something almost like pity. Almost. He'd built his entire life on maintaining control, on crafting narratives that made him the hero and others the villains. And in one moment, in front of everyone who mattered in his social and business world, that control had been ripped away. Not by Isabella making accusations, but simply by her existing. Her and her 4 children, living proof that every word he'd said about her had been a lie. "I should go," Isabella said, pocketing her phone and taking her children's hands again. "This is your celebration, not mine. I just wanted to accept your invitation and show you that I'm doing well. Very well, actually." She glanced down at her children, who were starting to get antsy after standing still for so long. "Come on, babies. Let's go look at those flowers you wanted to see." She turned to leave, but Dominic's voice stopped her. "Wait." Isabella paused but didn't turn around. "Why did you really come here?" Dominic asked, and there was something broken in his voice. "Was this just to humiliate me?" Now Isabella did turn, looking back at the man she'd once loved, the man who'd destroyed her and forced her to rebuild herself. "I came here," she said slowly, "because you invited me. Because you chose a venue loaded with our memories. Because you wanted me to see your new wife and your new baby and feel small. You wanted to hurt me one more time, Dominic. So I decided to show you something instead. I showed you that you don't get to write my story anymore. That the woman you threw away like garbage turned herself into gold. And yes, I wanted you to see my children, because they're the most beautiful thing that's ever happened to me, and you don't get to have any part of them." She paused. "So to answer your question, no. This wasn't about humiliating you. This was about liberating myself from the last hold you had on my life, my fear that you were right about me. Today, I proved you weren't. And now I'm free." With that, Isabella walked away, her children following happily, already chattering about the fountains and flowers they'd spotted. Behind her, she left chaos, a garden full of shocked guests, a pregnant woman questioning everything about her marriage, and a man who just watched his carefully constructed world collapse. But Isabella didn't look back. She'd said what she needed to say. She'd done what she came to do. And now, finally, she could close this chapter of her life and move forward without Dominic Lawrence's shadow following her. Or at least, that's what she thought. She had no idea that this was just the beginning. Isabella spent the next 20 minutes walking through the gardens with her children, pointing out flowers and butterflies, letting them splash their hands in the fountains under Carmen's watchful supervision. She could feel eyes on her the entire time, guests who'd filtered away from the terrace where Dominic and Vanessa stood in what looked like an increasingly heated conversation. People approached her tentatively, like she might detonate if they got too close. The first was Diane Matthews, who'd been in Isabella's Pilates class years ago. "Isabella," she said, her voice uncertain. Those are beautiful children. I didn't know you'd." "Thank you," Isabella replied pleasantly. "Yes, I'm very blessed. I should have called," Diane continued, guilt written across her face. "After the divorce. I should have checked on you. But Dominic made it seem like I was unstable?" Isabella supplied. "Like I'd become obsessed with fertility to the point of mental illness? Like I'd made his life unbearable." She watched Diane flush with embarrassment. "It's fine, Diane. People believe what they want to believe. And Dominic has always been very convincing." Diane looked like she wanted to say more, but Isabella had already turned her attention back to Sophia, who'd found a particularly interesting flower and was trying to pick it. "Gentle, sweetheart. We look with our eyes, not our hands." More people came over the next few minutes. Some offered awkward apologies. Others made transparent attempts to get details about what had just happened on the terrace. A few, like Marcus Chin, Dominic's business partner, came with thinly veiled hostility. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" Marcus said, keeping his voice low. "Coming here to cause a scene at Dominic's baby shower." Isabella looked at him with cool detachment. "If me existing causes a scene, Marcus, that says more about the lies Dominic told than about my intentions. Those medical records you showed Vanessa could be fabricated. You know that, right? You could have doctored those documents just to make him look bad." "I could have," Isabella agreed. "But I didn't. Everything I showed her is real and can be verified through the fertility clinic and Dr. Morrison himself. If Dominic wants to claim otherwise, he's welcome to try. I kept copies of everything." Marcus's jaw tightened. "He's my friend. And you just ruined his life." "No," Isabella said quietly. "He ruined his own life by building it on lies. I just showed up." Marcus walked away muttering something under his breath. But Isabella noticed that several other guests who'd overheard the exchange were now looking at her with something like respect rather than pity. The tide was turning. The narrative was changing. Isabella Reeves wasn't the tragic, broken ex-wife anymore. She was the woman who'd survived, thrived, and returned to tell the truth. But the real confirmation that she detonated Dominic's world came about 30 minutes after the initial confrontation, when one of the event staff approached her nervously. "Ma'am? Mrs. Loran, the current Mrs. Loran, asked if you would be willing to speak with her privately. In the Rose Garden Pavilion." Isabella glanced at Carmen, who immediately understood and moved to keep a closer eye on the children. "Of course," Isabella said. "Lead the way." The Rose Garden Pavilion was a small, covered structure at the far end of the estate, surrounded by climbing roses that filled the air with their sweet scent. Vanessa was there, standing with her arms wrapped around herself despite the warm afternoon, looking small and lost in her flowing white dress. When she saw Isabella approach, she straightened slightly, trying to reclaim some dignity. "Thank you for coming," Vanessa said, her voice thick with emotion. "I wasn't sure you would." "Why did you want to speak to me?" Isabella asked gently. She'd been angry at Vanessa earlier, angry at the younger woman for being everything Dominic had traded her in for, angry at her for getting pregnant so easily when Isabella had suffered for years. But looking at Vanessa now, with her carefully applied makeup streaked from crying, her hands trembling, Isabella felt only sympathy. Vanessa was a victim too. "I need to know the truth," Vanessa said. "All of it. Not what Dominic told me, not what I assumed, but what actually happened in your marriage." Isabella hesitated. "Vanessa, I don't think rehashing my failed marriage is—" "Please," Vanessa interrupted, and there was desperation in her voice. "I'm 8 months pregnant with a man's baby, and I just found out he's been lying to me about fundamental things. I need to know what kind of man I married. I need to know if—" She touched her belly again. "I need to know if he's going to do to me what he did to you." And there it was. The real question. Would Dominic's pattern repeat? Would Vanessa become the next woman blamed, discarded, destroyed when things didn't go according to his plans? Isabella sighed and gestured to a bench in the pavilion. They both sat, 2 women who'd loved the same man, now connected by his betrayals. And Isabella told her story. Not the public version, not the sanitized version, but the real one. She told Vanessa about the early years of her marriage, when things had been good. About the slow erosion that had started when they began trying to conceive. About the emotional abuse disguised as concern. How Dominic would say things like, "I'm worried about you, you're becoming obsessed," when she'd simply wanted to talk about their fertility treatments. About the social isolation, how he'd slowly cut her off from friends and family by making her believe she was too emotionally fragile to be around people. About the blame, constant and insidious, always positioning her as the problem, the defective one, the reason their dreams weren't coming true. She told Vanessa about the 12 rounds of IVF, about injecting herself with hormones while Dominic was too busy to come to appointments, about the mounting sense of failure with each negative test. About the night he'd handed her divorce papers and told her she wasn't woman enough to be his wife. About the discovery, months later, that he'd known all along where the real problem lay and had chosen to let her suffer rather than admit it. Vanessa listened to all of it, tears streaming down her face, one hand never leaving her pregnant belly. When Isabella finished, they sat in silence for a long moment, the only sound the breeze rustling through the roses. "He told me you were mentally unstable," Vanessa finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That you'd become depressed and paranoid. That you'd accused him of terrible things during the divorce. He made it sound like he'd escaped from something toxic." "Of course he did," Isabella said without bitterness. "That's how men like Dominic operate. They create a narrative where they're the victim, where their cruelty is actually self-defense. It makes it easier for them to move on without guilt." How did you survive it?" Vanessa asked, looking at Isabella with something like awe. "You seem so strong now. So put together. How did you get from where you were to here?" Isabella thought about that question. About the months of therapy. About the slow, painful process of rebuilding her self-worth. About deciding to have children on her own terms. About starting her business and proving she could succeed without Dominic's shadow. About all the tiny steps that had eventually led to the woman she was today. "I stopped believing his version of who I was," Isabella said simply. "That was the first step. And then I built my life based on who I actually wanted to be, not who he'd convinced me I was. It wasn't easy. Some days I still struggle. But I'm free now in a way I never was when I was married to him. And that freedom is worth everything I went through to get it." Vanessa nodded slowly, absorbing this. "What should I do?" she asked. "About the baby. About him. About everything." Isabella reached over and squeezed Vanessa's hand. "I can't tell you what to do. That's something you have to decide for yourself. But I can tell you this, whatever you decide, make sure it's based on reality, not on the story Dominic wants you to believe. Don't let him gaslight you into thinking what you saw today didn't happen. Those medical records are real. His lies are real. And you deserve to make decisions based on truth." "He's going to be furious with me," Vanessa said quietly. "For talking to you. For believing you over him." "Probably," Isabella agreed. "But here's what I learned too late. A man who gets angry at you for seeking the truth isn't a man who has your best interests at heart. A good partner would want you to have all the information. A good partner wouldn't need to hide things or lie to maintain your relationship." They sat for a while longer, two women bound by a shared experience of Dominic's manipulations, before Vanessa finally stood. "I should get back," she said. "People will be looking for me. This is supposed to be my baby shower, after all." She laughed, but it was hollow. Some celebration this turned out to be. "I'm sorry," Isabella said, and meant it. "I didn't come here to ruin your day. I came to... I don't even know what I came for anymore. Closure, maybe. Or just to prove that I survived him." "You did more than survive him," Vanessa said, looking at Isabella with admiration. "You became amazing. And you showed me something today that I needed to see, even if it hurts." She paused. "Your children are beautiful, by the way. You should be very proud." "I am," Isabella said softly. "They're everything." Vanessa nodded and walked away, back toward the main garden where her husband and 200 guests were waiting. Isabella watched her go, hoping that Vanessa would have the strength to make the choices Isabella wished she'd made years earlier. To demand truth. To refuse gaslighting. To build a life based on authenticity rather than on someone else's convenient lies. Isabella made her way back to where Carmen was entertaining her children. Elijah ran to her immediately, showing her a flower petal he'd found. "Mama, look! Purple! It's beautiful, baby," Isabella said, kneeling down to his level. She gathered all 4 of her children close, breathing in their baby shampoo scent, feeling their solid warmth against her. This was real. This was hers. Whatever happened with Dominic and Vanessa from this point forward, whatever social fallout occurred, whatever gossip spread through Seattle's elite circles, none of it mattered as much as these 4 perfect humans who called her Mama. "Should we head home?" Carmen asked gently. "I think they're getting tired." Isabella nodded. She'd accomplished what she came for, and staying longer would just be torture for her children, who had already been remarkably patient. They made their way toward the garden exit, and Isabella tried to ignore the continued stares and whispers. She'd become a spectacle, a cautionary tale, a piece of gossip that would fuel dinner conversations for weeks. But she'd also become something else, a woman who'd told her truth and survived it. They were almost to the car when she heard her name called. "Isabella! Wait!" She turned to see James running toward her, her best friend whom she'd texted earlier to let him know where she was going. James was 39, a software engineer at one of Seattle's major tech companies, and he'd been her friend since college. He'd watched her entire relationship with Dominic, had stood up in their wedding, had witnessed the slow deterioration of her marriage, and had been one of the few people who'd stayed loyal to her through the divorce. "What are you doing here?" Isabella asked, surprised but pleased to see him. "You texted me that you were going to Dominic's baby shower," James said, slightly out of breath. "Did you really think I was going to let you do that alone? I've been sitting in my car for the last hour, waiting to see if you needed backup." Isabella felt tears prick her eyes. "You didn't have to do that." "Of course I did," James said firmly. "You're my best friend. And I've been waiting 3 years for you to finally stand up to that bastard." He glanced toward the garden. "Based on the people streaming out of here and the amount of gossip I'm overhearing, I'm guessing you more than stood up to him? I might have caused a bit of a scene," Isabella admitted. James grinned. "Good. He deserved it." He crouched down to the children's level. "And who are these little troublemakers?" The Quadruplets, who knew Uncle James well, immediately mobbed him with hugs and excited chatter. James had been a fixture in their lives, showing up for birthdays, helping with bedtime when Isabella was overwhelmed, being the male presence they didn't have from a father. He'd never been anything but supportive, never made Isabella feel like a burden, never asked for more than friendship even though, and Isabella had recently started to suspect this, he might have feelings that went deeper than platonic. "Come on," James said, standing up and taking Lucas's hand. "Let's get these kids home. You can tell me all about today's drama on the way." As they loaded the children into Isabella's SUV, with James helping to buckle car seats and hand out the snacks that would keep everyone happy for the drive home, Isabella felt something she hadn't felt in years. Safe. Supported. Like she had a partner, even if that partner was just a friend who showed up when she needed him. It was a stark contrast to her marriage to Dominic, where she'd felt increasingly isolated and alone despite technically having a husband. They pulled away from the Rosewood Garden estate, leaving behind the chaos Isabella had created. In the rearview mirror, she could see more guests departing, no doubt eager to spread the news of what had happened. By tomorrow, everyone in their social circle would know the truth about Dominic's lies, the revelation of Isabella's children, the confrontation between the ex-wife and the current wife. It would be the scandal of the season. But as Isabella drove home, her children chattering happily in the back seat, James in the passenger seat telling silly jokes that made everyone laugh, she realized something important. She didn't care about the scandal. She didn't care about the gossip. She didn't even really care about whether Dominic's reputation was destroyed or not. What she cared about was that she'd faced him, told her truth, and walked away with her dignity intact. That was the real victory. Not public humiliation of her ex-husband. Not social vindication. but the quiet certainty that she knew her worth now, and no one could take that from her again. What Isabella didn't know, what she couldn't have predicted, was that the chaos she'd left behind at that baby shower was just the beginning. Dominic wasn't the type of man to accept defeat quietly. And wounded pride in a powerful man was a dangerous thing. The real battle was still to come. 3 days after the baby shower, Isabella's life exploded in ways she hadn't anticipated. It started with a phone call from Maya at 7 in the morning on Friday. Isabella was in the middle of breakfast chaos. Elijah had spilled his juice, Sebastian was refusing to eat anything that wasn't shaped like a dinosaur, Lucas was crying because his favorite spoon was in the dishwasher, and Sophia was trying to climb out of her high chair. The normal morning madness of a household with 4 toddlers. "You need to see this," Maya said without preamble when Isabella answered. "Check your email. And maybe sit down first." Isabella felt a chill run down her spine. "What's wrong?" "Just look. I'll stay on the line." Keeping the phone balanced between her shoulder and ear, Isabella wiped juice off the floor with one hand while pulling up her email on her phone with the other. The top message was from her company's legal counsel with the subject line, "Urgent legal threat." Isabella clicked it open, and her blood ran cold as she read. Dominic was suing her for defamation, emotional distress, and interference with his marriage. The demand letter, sent by one of Seattle's most aggressive law firms, claimed that Isabella had, maliciously and with premeditated intent, shown up at his baby shower to spread false and defamatory allegations about his fertility and his character. It claimed she had fabricated medical documents to make him look bad. It demanded she issue a public apology, retract all statements made at the baby shower, and pay $2 million in damages. "He can't be serious," Isabella breathed, reading through the legal language that twisted everything she'd done into something malicious. "Everything I said was true. I have proof." "I know," Maya said grimly. "But you know Dominic. He's not going to let what happened at that baby shower stand. His reputation is everything to him, and you shredded it in front of 200 people. This lawsuit is his way of controlling the narrative again. The medical records are real. They can be verified. I know. And his lawyers probably know that too. This isn't really about winning the lawsuit, is he? It's about making your life difficult. About tying you up in legal proceedings. About making you look like the aggressor. He's going on the offensive before you can." Isabella slumped against the counter, watching her children continue their breakfast chaos, blissfully unaware that their mother's world was tilting again. "What do I do?" "You fight back," Maya said firmly. "You've done nothing wrong. You showed up at an event you were invited to, told the truth when asked direct questions, and showed medical records that are completely authentic. Any judge will see this lawsuit for what it is, a slap suit designed to silence you." "A slap suit?" "Strategic lawsuit against public participation. It's when someone with money and power sues someone to shut them up, not because they actually have a valid legal claim. It's harassment dressed up as litigation." Maya paused. "But this is going to get ugly. Dominic has deep pockets and apparently zero shame about using them. You need a good lawyer. Actually, you need a great lawyer." "I can't afford a legal battle right now," Isabella said, her mind racing through her finances. "The company's doing well, but most of my capital is tied up in growth. And lawyer fees for something like this. I'll represent you." Maya cut her off. "Pro bono." "Maya, you can't." "I absolutely can. I've been waiting for years to take Dominic down legally. And besides, you're my sister. I'm not letting him bully you again." There was steel in Maya's voice. "Forward me everything. I'll start drafting a response. And Izzy? Don't talk to anyone about this. Not friends, not mutual acquaintances, definitely not the media. Anything you say can and will be used against you in court." After hanging up with Maya, Isabella tried to regain her composure and finish breakfast with her children. But her mind kept racing. A lawsuit. Dominic was actually suing her for telling the truth. It was so perfectly on brand for him. When confronted with his lies, he didn't apologize or reflect, he attacked. He made himself the victim, and his actual victim the villain. The doorbell rang just as Isabella was wiping faces and cleaning up breakfast dishes. Through the window, she saw an expensive black sedan parked outside. Her stomach dropped. That wasn't a normal visitor's car. That was the kind of car lawyers and process servers drove. She opened the door to find a man in a suit holding a manila envelope. "Isabella Reeves?" "Yes?" "You've been served." He handed her the envelope and walked away without another word, getting back into his sedan and driving off. Isabella stared at the envelope in her hands. Official lawsuit papers. Making it all real. She was being sued by her ex-husband for the crime of existing and telling the truth. The absurdity would have been funny if it wasn't also terrifying. Her phone started ringing again. Then again. Then again. She looked at the screen and saw notifications flooding in, text messages, missed calls, emails, all from numbers she didn't recognize. What the hell was happening? She clicked on one of the text messages. It was from a reporter at the Seattle Times. "Ms. Reeves, we'd like to get your comment on the lawsuit filed by Dominic Laurent. Would you be available for an interview?" Another text, this one from a local TV station. "Isabella, we're covering the Laurent lawsuit and would love to hear your side of the story." More messages. More calls. More interview requests. Somehow, news of the lawsuit had already leaked to the media. Which meant Dominic's team had leaked it deliberately. This was his counterattack, not just suing her, but making sure everyone knew he was suing her, positioning himself as the wrong party, the man defending his reputation against a malicious ex-wife. Isabella's hands were shaking as she turned off her phone. She couldn't deal with this right now. She had 4 toddlers who needed her, a company that needed her attention, and apparently a legal battle that was going to consume her life. Carmen arrived for her shift and immediately noticed Isabella's distress. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm being sued," Isabella said numbly. "By my ex-husband. For telling the truth about our marriage." Carmen's face darkened. "That pendejo. After what he put you through, he has the audacity to." She stopped herself, glancing at the children. "Sorry. But that's unbelievable. I need to call my lawyer. Can you handle the kids for a bit?" "Of course. Take all the time you need." Isabella retreated to her home office and called Maya back. For the next 2 hours, they went over every detail of what had happened at the baby shower, what Isabella had said, what documents she'd shown, what witnesses were present. Maya was building a defense, and she was thorough. By the end of the call, Isabella felt slightly better. They had a strong case. The truth was on their side. But strong cases required proof, and proof required resources, and resources required time and energy that Isabella wasn't sure she had. The weekend was a blur of stress and legal preparation. Maya came over on Saturday with another attorney from her firm, and they spent hours documenting everything: Isabella's medical records, the fertility clinic's records, communication logs between Dominic and Dr. Morrison, financial records showing Dominic's payments to the doctor, everything they could gather to prove that Isabella's statements at the baby's shower had been factual. On Sunday evening, just as Isabella was putting the children to bed, her phone rang with an unknown number. Normally she wouldn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Isabella? It's Vanessa. Vanessa Laurent." Isabella nearly dropped the phone. "Vanessa. I'm surprised to hear from you. I know this is strange. And I shouldn't be calling you. Dominic would lose his mind if he knew. But I need to tell you something." Vanessa's voice was strained, emotional. "The lawsuit. It's not really about defamation." "What do you mean?" "Dominic's terrified," Vanessa said. "After you left the baby shower, after I confronted him with those medical records, he completely fell apart. Not in front of the guests, but later, when we got home. He was panicking. Saying that you destroyed his reputation, that his business partners would lose faith in him, that he needed to control the narrative before it got out of hand. The lawsuit was his lawyer's idea. Make you the bad guy before you could make him the bad guy. But I wasn't trying to make him the bad guy," Isabella protested. "I was just—" "I know," Vanessa interrupted. "I believe you. I believe everything you told me in that pavilion. And that's why I'm calling. Because I have something you need. What? Evidence. More evidence than what you've already shown me. Dominic keeps everything: emails, texts, recorded conversations. He's meticulous about documentation because he's always worried about being sued or exposed. After the baby shower, I went through his home office. I found files, Isabella. Files about your marriage, your divorce, your fertility treatments. Files with communications between him and Dr. Morrison. Files with notes about how to frame the divorce narrative to make you look unstable. All of it. Isabella's heart was pounding. You have all of that? I made copies. Digital copies of everything. I can send them to you. Vanessa, why are you doing this? You're pregnant with his child. You're married to him. This could destroy my marriage? Vanessa laughed bitterly. Isabella, my marriage is already destroyed. The moment I read those medical records you showed me, everything changed. I can't trust him. I can't believe anything he says anymore. And I'm terrified that he's going to do to me what he did to you, twist reality until I don't know what's true anymore. So yes, I'm doing this. Because someone needs to hold him accountable. And because you deserve justice. If Dominic finds out you're helping me, I'm already planning to leave him, Vanessa said quietly. I'm just waiting until after the baby is born because my doctor doesn't want me stressed during the last month of pregnancy. But I've contacted a lawyer. I'm getting out. And before I go, I want to make sure he can't hurt anyone else the way he hurt you. Isabella felt tears stinging her eyes. This young woman, who had every reason to hate Isabella or at least be jealous of her, was risking everything to help her. Thank you, Isabella whispered. You have no idea what this means. Send me a secure email address. I'll transfer everything tonight. After the call ended, Isabella sat in her darkened office, her mind reeling. This changed everything. With Vanessa's evidence, Dominic's lawsuit wasn't just defensible, it was a joke. They could prove not just that Isabella's statements were true, but that Dominic had systematically planned to deceive her, had paid others to help him deceive her, and had carefully orchestrated a narrative designed to destroy her reputation while protecting his own. She called Maya immediately, explaining about Vanessa's call and the promised evidence. Maya was cautiously optimistic. If what she's promising is real, this lawsuit is dead in the water. More than that, Dominic could be facing serious consequences. Fraud, maybe. Definitely ethical violations if he paid Dr. Morrison to withhold medical information. This could be huge. That night, the files arrived. Hundreds of pages of documents, emails, text messages, recorded conversations. Isabella spent hours going through them, and with each page, her anger grew. Not the hot, destructive anger she'd felt right after the divorce, but cold, calculated fury. Because the files showed something she'd suspected but never proven, Dominic had always known he was the problem. From the very beginning, before they'd even started trying to conceive, he'd known about his fertility issues. And he'd not just hidden them from her. He'd actively worked to make sure she believed she was the one who was broken. There were emails to Dr. Morrison discussing how to position the fertility treatments to avoid highlighting male factor issues. There were text messages to friends where Dominic joked about letting Isabella think it's her fault because it's easier than dealing with the ego hit. There were notes in his personal files about maintaining the narrative that Isabella is the problem, to protect his image in their social circle. It was all there. Every calculated decision. Every deliberate deception. Every moment where he'd chosen his ego over her mental health. And there was more. Files showing that Dominic had known about Isabella's depression during their marriage, had actually discussed it with his personal trainer and his business coach, but had never suggested she get professional help because having her dependent and insecure is actually working in my favor right now. Files showing that he'd deliberately isolated her from her friends and family by telling them she was going through something and needed space, when really he just wanted her vulnerable and alone. Files proving what Isabella had felt but never been able to articulate. Her marriage had been a sustained campaign of psychological manipulation designed to break her down and keep her under control. By 2 a.m, Isabella had read everything. She forwarded the most damning files to Maya with a note. This isn't just evidence for the lawsuit. This is evidence of abuse. What do we do with it? Maya's response came quickly, despite the late hour. We destroy him legally. And then we make sure no woman ever has to go through what you went through with him again. Go to sleep, Izzy. Tomorrow, we go to war. Isabella should have felt triumphant. She had everything she needed to not just defend herself, but to completely dismantle Dominic's lawsuit and his reputation. She should have been celebrating. But instead, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she felt something else entirely. Sadness. Grief. Not for Dominic or their marriage, but for the years she'd lost believing his lies. For the woman she'd been who had internalized all his criticism and blame. For every moment she'd spent hating herself because he'd convinced her she was worth hating. But alongside that sadness was something new. Something powerful. The absolute certainty that she was done being Dominic Lawrence's victim. Done letting him control any part of her narrative. Done caring what he thought or said or did. She had her children. She had her business. She had her sister and James and other people who actually loved her. She had the truth on her side. And now, finally, she had proof. Dominic had made a critical mistake. He'd sued her thinking she'd fold, thinking she'd settle quietly to avoid the drama, thinking she'd be too scared or too broken to fight back. He'd forgotten that Isabella Reeves wasn't the same woman he'd divorced 3 years ago. She wasn't weak anymore. She wasn't isolated. She wasn't confused about her worth. She was strong. She was supported. And she was about to show him exactly what happened when you underestimated the woman you tried to destroy. The next morning, Maya filed their response to Dominic's lawsuit. But it wasn't just a response, it was a counterclaim. Isabella was countersuing for fraud, emotional distress, and the intentional infliction of psychological harm during their marriage. The documents included extensive evidence from Vanessa's files, medical records proving Dominic's knowledge of his fertility issues, and testimony from Dr. Morrison who, terrified of losing his medical license, had agreed to cooperate fully. The media storm that followed made the baby shower incident look like a light drizzle. This was a hurricane. Major news outlets picked up the story. Tech entrepreneur sued by ex-wife for sustained psychological abuse. Fertility fraud, how one man let his wife believe she was broken. The dark side of Seattle's elite, Dominic Lawrence exposed. Isabella's phone exploded again, but this time, she was ready. Maya had hired a PR firm to handle media inquiries, and they'd crafted a careful statement. Ms. Reeves is grateful that the truth is finally being heard. She hopes that by sharing her story, she can help other women recognize the signs of psychological manipulation and abuse in their own relationships. She looks forward to resolving this matter in court. The response from their former social circle was immediate and dramatic. People who'd cut Isabella off after the divorce suddenly wanted to reconnect, to apologize, to explain that they'd never known the full story. Business associates of Dominic started distancing themselves from him. 3 major clients pulled their contracts, citing ethical concerns. His business partner, Marcus Chin, released a statement saying he was reevaluating his partnership in light of recent revelations. But the most significant response came from an unexpected source. 5 days after the counterclaim was filed, Isabella received a call from a woman named Dr. Sarah Martinez, who introduced herself as a psychologist specializing in narcissistic abuse and manipulation. "I saw your story in the news," Dr. Martinez said. "And I had to reach out because what you're describing, what the documents show about your ex-husband's behavior, is a textbook case of coercive control. I've been studying these patterns for 20 years, and I'd like to offer to testify as an expert witness in your case if your lawyer thinks it would help." Isabella was stunned. Yes. I think that would help. But why would you do that? You don't know me. Because cases like yours matter, Dr. Martinez explained. Most coercive control happens behind closed doors, where there's no evidence, no witnesses. But your ex-husband was arrogant enough to document everything. That's incredibly rare. If we can get this evidence in front of a judge, if we can show a clear pattern of psychological manipulation and the damage it causes, it sets a precedent. It helps other women who are going through the same thing but don't have the documentation you have. The idea that her nightmare could help other women made Isabella's throat tight with emotion. I'd be honored to have you testify. Over the next few weeks, the case built momentum. Maya was relentless, filing motion after motion, each one supported by increasingly damning evidence. Dr. Morrison's testimony about the payments and the cover-up. Vanessa's willingness to testify about what she'd discovered in Dominic's files. Expert witnesses explaining the psychological impact of sustained deception and manipulation. Former employees of Dominic's company coming forward with stories of his narcissistic behavior in professional settings. And through it all, Isabella kept living her life. She went to work. She played with her children. She took them to the park, to music class, to playdates. She didn't let Dominic's lawsuit consume her, even though it was constantly there, lurking in the background. She'd learned that survival meant not letting him dominate her thoughts, even when he was trying to dominate her life through legal action. But she also did something else. Something she hadn't planned but that felt necessary. She started speaking publicly about her experience. First in a long-form interview with a major women's magazine, then on a podcast about surviving narcissistic relationships, then at a conference for fertility advocates. She told her story, not just the facts about the medical deception, but the emotional reality of what it felt like to be gaslit and manipulated for years. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of women reached out to share their own stories of partners who'd blamed them for relationship problems, who'd hidden information, who'd systematically destroyed their self-worth. Isabella realized she'd stumbled into something bigger than her personal vendetta against Dominic. She'd become a voice for women who'd been silenced, blamed, and broken by men who'd learned to weaponize their vulnerabilities. And that role, that responsibility, transformed how she thought about the lawsuit. It wasn't just about holding Dominic accountable anymore. It was about creating a record, a precedent, a warning to other would-be manipulators that their victims might not stay silent forever. 2 months after filing the counterclaim, Isabella's lawyer received a call from Dominic's legal team. They wanted to settle. Dominic would drop his defamation lawsuit entirely. He'd issue a public apology admitting he deceived Isabella about his fertility issues. He'd pay her legal fees plus a substantial settlement. In exchange, Isabella would agree not to pursue any further legal action and would sign an NDA preventing her from discussing the specifics of their marriage in the future. Maya brought the offer to Isabella, and they discussed it for hours. The settlement was tempting. It would end the stress of litigation, provide financial security, and give Isabella closure. But the NDA was a problem. It would mean stopping the advocacy work she'd started. It would mean staying silent about the patterns of abuse she'd identified. It would mean letting Dominic buy her silence, one last time. "What do you want to do?" Maya asked finally. "Because legally, this is a good offer. You'd win more if we went to trial, but trials are unpredictable. This is a sure thing." Isabella thought about her children, playing in the next room. About the woman she'd been when she signed divorce papers with shaking hands. About the woman she was now, strong enough to face Dominic in court if necessary. About all the women who'd reached out to her, thanking her for making them feel less alone. "No NDA," Isabella said firmly. "He can keep his apology and his money. I want the trial. I want everything to come out in open court, on the public record, where it can't be hidden or minimized or explained away. I want other women to be able to point to this case and say, 'See? I'm not crazy. This is what abuse looks like.'" Maya smiled, pride evident on her face. "That's my sister. Okay. We go to trial." The decision to refuse the settlement sent shockwaves through Seattle's elite community. People couldn't understand why Isabella would turn down money and closure to continue a painful public battle. But Isabella understood something they didn't. She'd spent 7 years of her marriage accepting Dominic's money and his version of reality in exchange for staying silent about her pain. She wasn't doing that anymore. Not for any amount. The trial was scheduled for 6 months out. Which meant 6 more months of preparation, stress, media attention, and navigating her complicated feelings about the man she'd once loved. But Isabella was ready. She'd survived him once already. She could survive him again. And this time, She wasn't just surviving. She was winning. The darkest hour came not during the trial preparation, but in the personal fallout that Isabella couldn't have anticipated. It started 3 months before the scheduled trial date, on an ordinary Tuesday morning when Carmen showed up looking shaken. "We need to talk," Carmen said, her voice serious. "About Dominic." Isabella felt her stomach drop. "What about him?" "He approached me yesterday when I was out with the kids at the park. He waited until I was alone with them. You were at that conference call, and he just appeared. Like he'd been watching, waiting for his chance." Isabella's blood ran cold. "What did he say to you?" "He offered me money. A lot of money. He said if I could provide testimony that you were an unfit mother, that you neglected the kids, left them alone, anything, he'd pay me $50,000. And when I refused, he threatened me. Said he'd have me deported if I didn't cooperate, that he'd report me to immigration, that he'd make sure I never worked with children again. That son of a bitch." Isabella breathed. "Carmen, I'm so sorry. You're here legally, he can't actually." "I know I'm legal," Carmen interrupted. "But he doesn't know that, or he doesn't care. The point is, he's desperate enough to threaten people I care about. To threaten the children. And that scares me, Isabella." It scared Isabella too. Because it meant Dominic wasn't just fighting this battle legally anymore. He was getting personal. He was going after the things and people Isabella loved most. Over the next few weeks, the harassment escalated. Private investigators started following Isabella everywhere, to work, to the grocery store, to her children's doctor appointments. Someone hacked into her company's email system and leaked confidential client communications, causing 3 major accounts to terminate their contracts. Anonymous accounts on social media began posting manipulated photos of Isabella, photoshopping her into compromising situations and tagging her business partners. A fake Yelp account left scathing reviews of her marketing firm, claiming she was unprofessional and unstable. Maya tried to trace it all back to Dominic, but he'd been careful. Everything was done through intermediaries, burner emails, untraceable payments. He was waging a shadow war designed to destroy Isabella's professional reputation and personal life without leaving evidence that could be used in court. The stress took its toll. Isabella started having panic attacks, the first since her early post-divorce therapy. She'd wake up in the middle of the night convinced someone was in her house, that Dominic had sent someone to hurt her or her children. She started drinking more wine than she should, using it to numb the constant anxiety. Her work suffered. Her patience with her children shortened. She could feel herself slipping back into the depression she'd worked so hard to climb out of. "He's trying to break you," James observed one night when he'd stopped by and found Isabella crying in her kitchen, a half-empty wine bottle on the counter. "He's trying to make you too exhausted and stressed to fight him in court. This is intentional psychological warfare." "It's working," Isabella admitted. "I feel like I'm drowning. The trial is still 3 months away and I'm barely holding it together now. How am I supposed to survive 3 more months of this?" James took the wine glass from her hand and set it aside. "By remembering why you're doing this. By remembering that every day you hold on is a day you're proving you're stronger than he is. By letting the people who love you help carry some of this weight. I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm insisting." James hesitated, then added softly, "Izzy, I need to tell you something. Something I probably should have said years ago, but the timing was never right." Isabella looked up at him through her tears. "What?" "I'm in love with you. I have been for years. Since before you married Dominic, if I'm being honest. I watched you marry him and I kept quiet because you seemed happy. I watched him destroy you and I stayed silent because you needed a friend more than you needed another complication. I watched you rebuild yourself and I waited because you needed time to heal." He took her hand. "But I can't watch you go through this alone. Let me help. Let me be more than just your friend. Let me be your partner in this fight." Isabella stared at him, shocked. "James, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything right now. I know the timing is terrible. I know you're dealing with more than enough without adding complicated feelings to the mix. But I needed you to know that you're not alone. That someone sees you, truly sees you, and loves what he sees. And that I'm here, however you need me to be. The confession should have been overwhelming, should have added to her stress. But instead, Isabella felt something loosen in her chest. James had been her constant for years, reliable, supportive, never asking for more than she could give. And she realized, in that moment, that she'd been in love with him too, but had been too scared to acknowledge it. Too scared of being hurt again. Too scared of trusting someone with her heart after Dominic had shattered it so thoroughly. "I'm not ready," she said honestly. "For a relationship. For anything beyond what we have now. But James, ask me again. When this is over. When I'm not fighting for my life in court. When I'm whole again. Ask me then." He smiled, and it was full of understanding. "Deal. But in the meantime, let me help. You don't have to carry this alone." True to his word, James became her anchor through the darkest weeks. He coordinated with Maya on legal strategies, freeing Isabella to focus on her children and her mental health. He hired a cybersecurity expert to track down the source of the email hacking and social media harassment. He even moved into her guest room temporarily, insisting that having someone else in the house would help her feel safer. But even with James's support, things continued to deteriorate. The breaking point came 6 weeks before the trial, when Isabella arrived at her children's daycare to pick them up and was met by the director with a grave expression. "Ms. Reeves, we need to talk. Someone called Child Protective Services and filed a report claiming you're neglecting your children. A social worker will be conducting a home visit tomorrow." Isabella felt the world tilt. "What? That's insane. My children are perfectly cared for. They're happy and healthy and—" "I know," the director interrupted gently. "And I told the social worker exactly that. But they're required to investigate every claim. I'm sure it will be fine, but I wanted to warn you so you're prepared." Isabella knew immediately who'd made the call. Dominic was trying to take her children. If he could get CPS to find her unfit, he could use it in court to discredit her entirely. And even if the investigation cleared her, which it would, because there was no truth to the allegations, the mere existence of a CPS investigation would be weaponized. Isabella Reeves, whose own children were the subject of a neglect investigation. That night, after putting the kids to bed, Isabella had a full breakdown. She sobbed until she couldn't breathe, until Maya and James were genuinely worried she might need medical intervention. "I can't do this," she kept saying. "He's too powerful. He has too much money. He's going to win because he can afford to keep coming at me until I break." Maya held her sister while James paced the room, his hands clenched into fists. "We need to end this," he said finally. "Not by giving up, but by going nuclear. It's time to stop playing defense." "What do you mean?" Maya asked. "I mean we leak everything," James said. "All of Vanessa's files. All the evidence of Dominic's manipulation and abuse. We don't wait for the trial. We take it public now, today, and we let the court of public opinion destroy him before he destroys Izzy. That could backfire," Maya warned. "It could look like we're trying to manipulate the jury pool. We could lose the case on a technicality. Or we could save Isabella's sanity and her children," James countered. "Look at her, Maya. She's falling apart. Dominic knows that the process is the punishment. He doesn't even need to win the case, he just needs to drag it out long enough that it destroys her. So we end it. Now." Isabella wiped her tears and looked at both of them. "Do it," she said. "Release everything. I don't care about the legal strategy anymore. I care about protecting my kids. If there's even a chance that CPS could take them because of Dominic's lies, I need to stop him by any means necessary." Maya was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay. But we do it smart. We don't just dump files on the internet. We give them to journalists we trust, people who will investigate and verify and present them in context. We make this about the story, not about revenge. Can you live with that?" "Yes," Isabella said. "I just want the truth out there. All of it. No more secrets. No more manipulation. Just the truth." Within 48 hours, Maya had coordinated with 3 major journalists, one from the Seattle Times, one from a national women's magazine, and one from a documentary filmmaker who specialized in exposing abuse. They were given access to everything: the files Vanessa had provided, Isabella's testimony about her marriage, expert analyses of the patterns of coercive control, financial records showing Dominic's payments to Dr. Morrison, communications between Dominic and his lawyers about strategy for destroying Isabella's reputation. The resulting media explosion was unprecedented. The Seattle Times ran a front-page exposé titled, "The Destruction of Isabella Reeves, Inside One Man's Systematic Campaign of Psychological Abuse." The women's magazine published a long-form feature with Isabella's full story, including photos of her with her children and excerpts from her therapy sessions documenting the impact of Dominic's manipulation. The documentary filmmaker released a 30-minute video that went viral within hours, detailing the fertility fraud and subsequent cover-up. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Public opinion turned decisively against Dominic. His remaining business partners abandoned him. His company's stock price plummeted. Protests were organized outside his office building. The hashtag I Stand With Isabella trended worldwide for 3 days. Celebrities shared Isabella's story. Other women began coming forward with their own experiences of being manipulated and gaslit by powerful men, creating a movement much larger than just Isabella's case. But with the public support came unexpected consequences. The media attention was intense and invasive. Reporters camped outside Isabella's home. Her children's faces appeared in newspapers, despite her requests for their privacy. She received thousands of messages daily, mostly supportive, but some viciously critical, calling her an attention seeker, accusing her of lying for money, blaming her for destroying a successful man's life. And Dominic, cornered and desperate, lashed out in the worst way possible. He released his own statement, claiming that Isabella had fabricated everything, that she was mentally unstable, that she'd manipulated Vanessa into betraying him, that the whole thing was an elaborate scheme to extort money from him. He hired his own PR team to push back against the narrative, and they were ruthless. They dug up every mistake Isabella had ever made: a DUI from her college years, a professional dispute from early in her career, unflattering photos from her depression after the divorce. They painted her as an unhinged gold digger who'd seduced a successful man, failed to give him children, and was now trying to destroy him out of spite. The character assassination was brutal. Isabella, who'd been receiving overwhelming support, suddenly found herself under attack from multiple fronts. Conservative commentators used her story to argue about the dangers of believing women without due process. Men's rights activists claimed she represented a dangerous trend of women weaponizing abuse allegations. Even some feminists questioned whether going public had been the right strategy, suggesting it might make legitimate abuse victims less likely to be believed. The stress of it all, the media scrutiny, the public debate over her character, the worry about her children being exposed to this toxicity, the ongoing legal battle, pushed Isabella to her breaking point. She stopped sleeping entirely. She lost 15 pounds in 2 weeks because she couldn't keep food down. Her panic attacks became so severe that Maya insisted she see a doctor, who prescribed anxiety medication that left her feeling foggy and disconnected. The home visit from CPS happened in the middle of all this chaos. A social worker arrived to find Isabella exhausted and medicated, her home cluttered because she'd been too overwhelmed to keep up with normal housework, her children being primarily cared for by Carmen because Isabella could barely function. The social worker was kind and ultimately determined there was no neglect, but she recommended that Isabella consider seeking additional support for her mental health, and scheduled a follow-up visit in 30 days. Isabella knew how that report would be used. Dominic's lawyers would point to it as evidence that she was unstable, that her children were suffering because of her mental state, that this whole public crusade was proof of her unfitness as a mother. She'd played right into his hands. That night, Isabella sat in her darkened bedroom, her children asleep down the hall, and seriously considered giving up. Not just on the lawsuit, but on everything. She thought about how much easier it would be to just disappear, move to another state, change her name, start over somewhere Dominic's reach couldn't find her. She thought about settling the lawsuit on his terms, signing the NDA, taking the money, and building a quiet life away from all of this chaos. She thought about all of this, phone in her hand, ready to call Maya and tell her to accept whatever settlement Dominic's team would offer. And then her daughter Sophia appeared in the doorway, rubbing her sleepy eyes, clutching her favorite stuffed animal. "Mama sad?" Sophia asked in her small voice, padding over to the bed. Isabella picked her up and held her close, breathing in the baby shampoo scent of her hair. "Mama's okay, sweetheart. Just tired. Tell you secret," Sophia whispered, like she always did before sharing something important. "You're the bestest mama ever. I love you big like the sky." And something in Isabella broke, not in a bad way, but in a way that let light in. She was fighting this battle not for herself, but for her children. So they'd grow up knowing their mother was strong enough to stand up to a powerful man who tried to destroy her. So they'd have a record of the truth when they were old enough to understand. So they'd know that sometimes the right thing is also the hardest thing, but you do it anyway because it matters. She held Sophia until the little girl fell back asleep, then carried her back to bed and tucked her in alongside her brothers. Looking at all four of them sleeping peacefully, trusting that their mother would protect them, Isabella made a decision. She wasn't giving up. She wasn't settling. She wasn't running away. She was going to see this through to the end, whatever that end looked like. Because teaching her children that you don't surrender to bullies was worth any amount of personal pain. But she was also going to do it smarter. She'd been so focused on fighting Dominic's lies that she'd lost sight of her own well-being. And you can't win a war if you don't survive the battles. The next morning, Isabella called Dr. Chin and scheduled an emergency therapy session. She called her doctor and got a referral to a psychiatrist who could better manage her anxiety medication. She called her company's COO and temporarily stepped back from day-to-day operations, trusting her team to keep things running while she focused on her health. She called Maya and James and told them she needed a break from legal strategy sessions. They could handle it for a while without her constant input. And then she did something she hadn't done in months. She took her children to the park, turned off her phone, and just played. She pushed them on swings. She helped them build sandcastles. She laughed at their jokes and wiped their tears and existed in the moment without thinking about lawsuits or media coverage or Dominic's next move. It felt like breathing after being underwater for too long. The darkest hour had passed. Not because the situation had improved. The trial was still looming, the media was still scrutinizing her every move, Dominic was still trying to destroy her. But because Isabella had remembered something crucial, she was more than this fight. She was a mother. A business owner. A sister. A friend. A woman who'd survived before and would survive again. Dominic could take a lot of things from her. But he couldn't take who she fundamentally was. And as long as she held on to that, she'd already won the war that mattered. The turning point came from an unexpected source, in an unexpected way. It was 6 weeks before the trial when Maya called Isabella with news that would change everything. "Vanessa's in labor," Maya said. "Early labor, she's only 36 weeks. But more importantly, she wants to talk to you. She says it's urgent." Isabella rushed to the hospital, leaving the children with James. She found Vanessa in a private room, monitors beeping steadily, her face pale but determined. Despite everything, despite being married to Isabella's abuser, despite being about to give birth to his child, Vanessa looked relieved to see her. "Thank you for coming," Vanessa said. "I know this is weird. I know you don't owe me anything. But I need to tell you something before this baby comes, before I lose my nerve." "What is it?" Vanessa pulled out her phone with shaking hands. "I've been recording him. For the past 2 months, since the lawsuit started getting serious, I've been secretly recording every conversation where Dominic talks about you or the case. I have hours of audio, Isabella. Hours of him admitting things he'd never say in court. Admitting he lied about the fertility issues. Admitting he paid people to follow you and harass you. Admitting he filed the false CPS report. All of it." Isabella felt her heart racing. "Why would you do that? You're having his baby. You're still married to him." "Not for much longer," Vanessa said grimly. "My divorce lawyer is filing papers next week. But I did this because—" She paused, tears streaming down her face. "Because he started doing to me what he did to you. Once I confronted him about the fertility lies, once I showed I wouldn't just believe everything he said, he turned on me. He started isolating me from my family, saying they were a bad influence. He started controlling my money, saying I needed to be more responsible. He started criticizing everything, how I dressed, how I decorated the house, how I was preparing for the baby. And I realized if I stayed, in 5 years I'd be you. Broken and blamed and convinced I was the problem. Isabella sat down heavily in the chair next to Vanessa's bed. I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry. You saved me. By standing up to him, by refusing to stay silent, you showed me what courage looks like. And I decided if you could fight him after 7 years of abuse, I could fight him after less than 2. Another contraction hit, and Vanessa gripped Isabella's hand, breathing through it. When it passed, she continued, the recordings are on this phone. It's a burner he doesn't know about. I'm giving it to you. Use it however you need to. Just promise me something. What? Promise me you'll win. Promise me you'll make sure he can't do this to anyone else. Promise me this ends with you. Isabella took the phone, feeling the weight of it, not the physical weight, but the weight of what it represented. Evidence that could end this entire nightmare. Evidence that would prove, beyond any doubt, that Dominic had systematically tried to destroy her. Evidence that would vindicate every choice she'd made, every boundary she'd defended, every moment she'd refused to back down. I promise, Isabella said. She stayed with Vanessa through the early labor, partly because it felt like the right thing to do and partly because she was processing what this meant. Vanessa was alone, her family was in California, and Dominic was at his lawyer's office preparing for the trial. No one should give birth alone, even if the circumstances were complicated. Why are you being nice to me? Vanessa asked during a quiet moment between contractions. I married your ex-husband. I got pregnant immediately, which must have been like salt in the wound. I was living the life you wanted. You should hate me. Isabella considered this. I did at first. When I saw the pregnancy announcement, when I saw you two together looking happy, I hated you. I hated that you got what I couldn't have. But you know what I realized? You didn't get what I wanted. You got Dominic. And having been married to Dominic, I know that's not actually a prize, no matter how it looks from the outside. You were his victim just like I was. We just had different timelines. Vanessa laughed through her tears. That's a depressingly accurate way to put it. By midnight, Vanessa's labor had progressed enough that the medical team decided it was time. Isabella waited in the hallway, unsure why she was still there but unable to leave. Maybe it was solidarity. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was because watching Vanessa become a mother reminded her of her own journey to motherhood, the fear, the hope, the overwhelming love. At 2:47 a.m., Vanessa's daughter Hope was born. 5 pounds 8 ounces, healthy despite being a few weeks early. A nurse brought Isabella in to see them, and she found Vanessa holding her daughter with an expression of fierce protectiveness that Isabella recognized immediately. She's beautiful, Isabella said softly. She's everything, Vanessa replied. And I'm going to make sure she never grows up thinking her worth is tied to making a man happy. I'm going to make sure she knows she's strong enough to walk away from anyone who tries to diminish her, even if that person is her own father. Isabella understood in that moment that Vanessa would be okay. That Hope would be okay. That the cycle of Dominic's abuse was ending, not continuing. Because both women had decided it would end. She left the hospital as dawn was breaking, Vanessa's burner phone in her purse, feeling like something fundamental had shifted. She called Maya as soon as she got to her car. We have everything, Isabella said. Vanessa recorded him, admitting to everything. Oh my God! Maya breathed. Is it admissible? Was she a party to the conversations? Washington is a two-party consent state, so she had to be present for the recordings. And she was. These are all conversations between her and Dominic in their home. It's legal. This is it, Izzy. This is the nail in the coffin. With these recordings, we don't just win the lawsuit. We bury him. Maya was right. When they turned the recordings over to the prosecutor's office, because some of what Dominic had admitted constituted actual crimes, everything accelerated. The district attorney's office opened an investigation into fraud, witness tampering, and filing false reports. Dominic's lawyers, realizing the case had become unwinnable, tried desperately to negotiate a settlement that would keep the recordings out of court. But Isabella refused every offer that included an NDA or any restriction on her ability to tell her story. 2 weeks before the scheduled trial, Dominic's legal team made a final offer. He would plead no contest to filing a false CPS report, pay a substantial fine, issue a public apology, and drop his lawsuit entirely. In exchange, Isabella would agree not to pursue any additional criminal charges and would not seek damages beyond her legal fees. "It's not perfect," Maya told Isabella. "He's basically buying his way out of serious consequences. But it's a win. Public apology, admission of wrongdoing, no NDA. You get to tell your story however you want. And he'll have a criminal record for filing a false report, which will follow him." Isabella thought about it for a long time. Part of her wanted the trial, wanted to watch Dominic squirm on the witness stand, wanted a jury to hear every detail of what he'd done. But another part of her was just tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of having her life consumed by this man who'd already taken so much from her. "I'll take it," she said finally. "On one condition, the apology has to include specific admissions. That he lied about the fertility issues. That he knew they were his, not mine. That he deliberately let me believe I was the problem. That he filed a false CPS report. All of it, specifically stated, not vague corporate speak. I'll make it happen," Maya promised. 1 week later, Dominic Laurent issued a public statement. It was everything Isabella had demanded and more, a detailed confession of his deceptions, manipulations, and attempts to destroy her reputation. The statement was picked up by every major news outlet. Isabella's vindication was complete and public. But more than the public vindication, what mattered to Isabella was that it was over. After 3.5 years of living in Dominic's shadow, through the divorce, the aftermath, the baby shower confrontation, the lawsuit, the media circus, it was finally over. He couldn't sue her again. He couldn't threaten her. He couldn't control her narrative. She was free. The day after Dominic's statement went public, Isabella did something she hadn't done in years. She threw a party. Not a fancy garden party or a corporate networking event, but a simple backyard barbecue with the people who'd stood by her. Maya and her family. James. Carmen. Her therapist Dr. Chen. A few close friends she'd reconnected with after the divorce. It was small, intimate, filled with people who'd seen her at her worst and loved her anyway. As Isabella watched her children play with Maya's kids, as she laughed at James's terrible dad jokes, as she felt the warmth of genuine friendship and family, she realized something profound. Dominic had tried to take everything from her, her self-worth, her reputation, her mental health, even her children. He'd failed. She not only survived him, she'd become someone stronger, more authentic, more whole than she'd ever been when she was trying to be the perfect wife. "You did it," James said, appearing beside her with 2 beers. He handed her one. "You actually did it." "We did it," Isabella corrected. "I couldn't have survived this without you. Without Maya. Without everyone here." "So," James said carefully, "it's been a few weeks since everything settled. You're not actively fighting for your life in court anymore. You seem—" He paused, searching for the word. "Lighter. More yourself? So I have to ask, because I promised I would ask again, Isabella Reeves, would you like to go on a date with me?" Isabella looked at him, really looked at him. James, who'd been her friend for over a decade. Who'd watched her marry the wrong man and never said, "I told you so." Who'd held her while she cried and celebrated with her when she succeeded. Who'd moved into her guest room to help her feel safe and never once made her feel like she owed him anything. Who'd loved her at her worst and wanted to love her at her best. "Yes," she said, and felt a smile spread across her face that was genuine and uncomplicated and full of hope. "I would really like that." They didn't kiss. They didn't make a big announcement to everyone at the party. They just stood there, side by side, watching the sunset and the children playing, 2 people who'd survived their own separate hells and found their way to each other. It felt like the beginning of something real. Something honest. Something built on truth instead of lies. That night, after everyone had gone home and the children were asleep, Isabella sat in her home office and did something she'd been thinking about for weeks. She started writing. Not a legal document, or a business proposal, but a book. Her story in her own words, from the beginning to the end. Every moment of manipulation. Every instance of gaslighting. Every choice she'd made to survive and eventually to thrive. She wrote not for revenge or vindication, but for every woman who'd ever been made to feel like she was the problem when the problem was the person who claimed to love her. She wrote because silence had almost destroyed her, and speaking had saved her. She wrote because the truth, once revealed, could never be hidden again. She wrote because she'd promised Vanessa, and the countless other women who'd reached out to her, that this would end with her. That Dominic Lawrence's ability to destroy women would die here, with Isabella Reeves refusing to be destroyed. And as the words flowed out of her, she felt the last pieces of her broken past falling away, leaving only the woman she'd become. Strong. Whole. Free. The darkest chapter of her life was closing. And the next chapter, whatever it held, would be written entirely on her own terms. 6 months after Dominic's public apology and the settlement of all legal matters, Isabella's book titled Unbroken, One Woman's Journey from Manipulation to Liberation, was published. It hit the New York Times bestseller list within a week and stayed there for 6 months. The book was raw, honest, and unflinching in its depiction of psychological abuse and the long road to recovery. It resonated with millions of readers, particularly women who recognized their own experiences in Isabella's story. With the book's success came speaking engagements. Isabella found herself on stages across the country, telling her story to audiences of hundreds, sometimes thousands. She spoke at women's conferences, corporate events about workplace abuse, domestic violence prevention forums, and mental health advocacy gatherings. Each time she shared her experience, women would approach her afterward with their own stories. Stories of partners who'd gaslit them, families who'd dismissed their pain, systems that had failed to protect them. Isabella listened to every single one, validated their experiences, and reminded them that they were survivors, not victims. The speaking engagements led to television appearances. First on local news shows, then national morning programs, eventually culminating in a primetime interview special where Isabella sat across from a renowned journalist and walked through her entire story. The interview was watched by 12 million people and sparked a national conversation about coercive control, reproductive manipulation, and the long-term impacts of psychological abuse. But perhaps the most unexpected outcome of Isabella's public advocacy was the impact on Dominic's life and career. His company, already struggling after the scandal, declared bankruptcy within a year. His business partners had all abandoned him. His reputation in Seattle's business community was destroyed beyond repair. He lost his house, his cars, most of his assets. He filed for bankruptcy himself and had to take a job working for a former competitor in a junior position, a humiliating fall from grace for someone who'd once been at the top of his industry. Isabella heard about his decline through the grapevine and felt nothing. Not satisfaction. Not pity, just nothing. He'd become irrelevant to her life, a character from her past rather than someone who still had power over her present. Vanessa, meanwhile, had flourished in her new life as a single mother. She'd gone back to school and become a licensed therapist specializing in helping women recognize and leave abusive relationships. She and Isabella had developed an unlikely friendship, bonded by their shared experience and their determination to help other women avoid their mistakes. They co-hosted a podcast called Breaking Patterns, where they discussed toxic relationship dynamics and strategies for healing. It became unexpectedly popular, reaching hundreds of thousands of listeners each episode. Isabella's business had recovered from the sabotage Dominic had orchestrated. In fact, it had thrived. The publicity from her case had actually attracted clients who admired her resilience and wanted to work with someone who'd proven she could overcome adversity. Reeves Marketing Solutions expanded to 3 cities, doubled its staff, and landed several Fortune 100 accounts. Isabella's personal net worth surpassed what Dominic's had been at his peak, a fact that amused Maya to no end. But the real transformation was in Isabella's personal life. She and James had been dating for a year, taking things slowly, building a relationship based on genuine compatibility and mutual respect rather than intensity and passion. It wasn't fireworks, it was steady, reliable, warm. James was patient with Isabella's occasional anxiety, her moments of PTSD when something triggered memories of Dominic's abuse. He was present for her children, becoming a stable father figure without trying to replace the donor who'd given them life. He'd proposed on the anniversary of their first official date, and Isabella had said yes without hesitation. The wedding was small and intimate, just close family and friends in Maya's backyard. Isabella wore a simple cream-colored dress, not white like her first wedding, because this wasn't about traditional symbolism. This was about choosing partnership from a place of strength rather than need. Her 4 children served as ring bearers and flower girl, dressed in coordinating outfits that made them look like the world's most adorable wedding party. When the officiant asked if anyone objected to the union, Elijah, now 5 years old, stood up and said loudly, "I don't object. James makes Mama happy." The laughter that followed was genuine and joyful. During their vows, Isabella said something that made everyone tear up. "James, you loved me when I was broken and celebrated with me when I became whole. You never tried to fix me because you understood I wasn't broken, just healing. You showed me that love doesn't have to hurt, that partnership doesn't require losing yourself, that I could be fully me and still be cherished. You're my safe place, my home, my future." They honeymooned in Italy, just the 2 of them, while Maya and Carmen tag-teamed childcare. It was the first time Isabella had been away from her children for more than a night, and she'd been anxious about it. But knowing they were with people who loved them, knowing she'd built a support system strong enough to hold them all, she'd been able to relax and just be present with her new husband. When they returned, life settled into a new normal. James moved permanently into Isabella's house, which had become their house, and they began the process of blending their lives fully. He legally adopted the Quadruplets, who were ecstatic to finally have the daddy they'd wanted. Isabella's family portrait, which used to be just her and 4 small children, now included James, and the change felt right in a way nothing had in years. But the most significant resolution came on what would have been Isabella's and Dominic's 10-year wedding anniversary. Isabella woke up that morning and realized she'd forgotten the date entirely. It had passed without her noticing, without triggering pain or memories or anything at all. Dominic no longer occupied space in her mind. He was just gone. Not from her history, but from her present and future. And that absence felt like the truest freedom she'd ever known. That same day, she received an unexpected message. It was from Dr. Morrison, the fertility doctor who'd participated in Dominic's deception. He'd retired and moved to Arizona, but he'd apparently been following Isabella's story. "I know my apology is years too late and probably meaningless," the message read. "But I need you to know that what I did was the greatest regret of my professional life. I violated my oath, my ethics, and basic human decency because a powerful man paid me to lie. You deserve better. Every woman I treated deserved better. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that watching you rebuild your life and use your pain to help others has been humbling. You turned my failure into your strength. That doesn't excuse what I did, but it's something." Isabella read the message several times, considering how to respond. Finally, she wrote back, "Your apology doesn't change the past, but it matters for the present. Thank you for having the courage to tell me the truth, even if it took years. I hope you've found peace with yourself. I've found peace despite you, and that's enough for me." She meant it. She'd forgiven Dr. Morrison, not because he deserved it, but because holding on to anger was exhausting and she was done being exhausted. She'd forgiven him the same way she'd forgiven herself for staying with Dominic as long as she had, for believing his lies, for all the choices she'd made from a place of fear and confusion. Forgiveness wasn't about saying what happened was okay. It was about refusing to let the past poison her future. The book continued to impact people in unexpected ways. Isabella received letters from women who'd left abusive marriages after reading it. From women who'd recognized abuse in their parents' relationships and sought therapy. From women who'd simply felt less alone in their struggles. She received letters from men who'd recognized their own abusive behaviors and were working to change. Letters from therapists who used her book as a teaching tool. Letters from lawmakers who cited it when pushing for better domestic violence protections. One letter came from a woman named Sarah who'd been in Isabella's position, manipulated about fertility issues, blamed for years, divorced and destroyed. Except Sarah's story had a different ending. She hadn't survived. She'd taken her own life, and her sister was writing to Isabella to say that she wished Sarah had read Isabella's book, had known that survival was possible, had seen that there was life after abuse. That letter broke Isabella's heart and strengthened her resolve. She'd survived not just for herself, but for every Sarah who didn't make it, who didn't have the resources or support or sheer stubborn determination to claw her way back from the edge. She'd survived to prove survival was possible. On the 2-year anniversary of the baby shower confrontation, the day that had started everything, Isabella received one final unexpected communication. It was an email from Dominic himself. Her first instinct was to delete it without reading, but curiosity won out. "Isabella," it began. "I know I have no right to contact you. I know you've moved on and I'm the last person you want to hear from. But I need to say something, and this is my last chance before I leave Seattle permanently. You were right about everything. I was the problem. I manipulated you, lied to you, tried to destroy you when you wouldn't accept my version of reality. I did it because I was terrified of looking weak, of admitting I was less than perfect, of accepting that I had limitations. So I made you carry my shame. I made you believe you were broken to avoid confronting my own brokenness. And when you finally stood up to me, when you showed the world who I really was, I tried to destroy you completely because I couldn't handle the truth. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But you deserve to know that everything you've said about me, everything you've written, everything you've shared, it's all true. And I'm sorry. Not because I want anything from you, but because you deserved to hear those words 7 years ago, and I was too much of a coward to say them. You won, Isabella. Not just the lawsuit or the public narrative, but life. You built something beautiful from the ashes I left you in. I hope you know how extraordinary that is. I'm moving to Denver next week to start over where no one knows my name. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be a better person than I was to you, though I know that's a low bar. Thank you for showing me what strength really looks like. Even if I had to be destroyed to learn the lesson, it was a lesson worth learning. Dominic." Isabella read the email 3 times, processing. Part of her wanted to respond with anger. Too little, too late, words can't undo damage. But another part of her recognized something she hadn't expected to see from Dominic: genuine accountability. Not excuses. Not justifications. Just an acknowledgement of what he'd done and an acceptance of consequences. She showed the email to James, who read it and then looked at her carefully. "How do you feel?" "I don't know," Isabella admitted. "It doesn't change anything. It doesn't make what he did okay. But I guess I'm glad he finally understands. That he's taking responsibility. Are you going to respond?" Isabella thought about it for a long time. Finally, she shook her head. "No. There's nothing I need to say to him. His journey to becoming a better person isn't my responsibility. I did my part. I survived him. I told the truth. I helped other women avoid my mistakes. What he does with his life from here is his problem, not mine." She deleted the email and blocked Dominic's address. That chapter was closed, and she wasn't reopening it for any reason. That evening, Isabella sat with her family, James, her 4 children, Maya and her family, Carmen, for their weekly family dinner. The noise was chaotic and wonderful, kids talking over each other, adults laughing, dishes being passed around, the comfortable chaos of people who loved each other. Isabella looked around the table and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This was her legacy. Not her business success or her best-selling book or her advocacy work, though all of that mattered. Her real legacy was this: a table full of people who'd chosen each other, who'd built something honest and strong together, who'd proven that families aren't just born, they're made. She'd taken the worst thing that ever happened to her and transformed it into something purposeful. Dominic had tried to write her story, casting her as the broken wife who couldn't give him what he needed. but she'd taken the pen from his hand and written her own ending. And her ending was beautiful. Not perfect, she still had hard days, still dealt with occasional anxiety, still carried scars from everything she'd been through. But she'd learned that being whole didn't mean being unmarked. It meant integrating your scars into your story, accepting them as part of who you are, and moving forward anyway. She'd learned that the opposite of being broken isn't being perfect. It's being authentic. And she was finally, fully, unapologetically herself. That was the truest victory. Not defeating Dominic in court. Not exposing his lies. Not rebuilding her career or finding new love. But simply becoming who she was always meant to be, free from anyone else's definition of her worth. As dinner wound down and the children started begging for dessert, Isabella caught James's eye across the table. He smiled at her, that steady, warm smile that said, "I see you, I love you, I'm here." And she smiled back. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, surrounded by love and laughter, Isabella Reeves was exactly where she belonged. Free. Whole. Unbroken. 5 years later, Isabella stood in front of a floor-to-ceiling window in her new office building, a sleek, modern structure in downtown Seattle that housed the expanded headquarters of Reeves Marketing Solutions. The view overlooked Elliott Bay, and on clear days like today, you could see the Olympic Mountains in the distance. She'd come a long way from the small apartment where she'd started her business while pregnant with Quadruplets, running operations from a laptop balanced on her bed. Behind her, her office was decorated with mementos of her journey. Framed copies of her book cover in different languages, Unbroken, had been translated into 23 languages and sold over 5 million copies worldwide. Awards from domestic violence prevention organizations honoring her advocacy work. Photos of her family, the most recent one showing her, James, and the 5 children at their beach house in Oregon. 5 children, because 2 years ago, Isabella and James had welcomed their own biological son, Nathaniel, into their family. The pregnancy had been unexpected and initially terrifying. Isabella had worried that having a biological child with James might change her relationship with her donor-conceived quadruplets. But those fears had been unfounded. The kids had welcomed their baby brother with enthusiasm, and Isabella had discovered that love didn't divide, it multiplied. Her phone buzzed with a reminder, video call with Vanessa in 10 minutes. Despite their unlikely beginning, Isabella and Vanessa had become true friends, sisters in survival who'd bonded over their shared experience and their determination to help other women. Today's call was to finalize details for their upcoming collaborative project, a documentary series about coercive control in relationships, featuring both their stories and those of dozens of other women who'd survived similar abuse. As she waited for the call, Isabella's mind drifted to how much had changed in 5 years. Her children were now in elementary school, precocious, confident kids who were growing up with a very different family dynamic than Isabella had experienced. Elijah had developed a passion for science, and was always conducting elaborate experiments that usually resulted in impressive messes. Sebastian had inherited his mother's creative streak and spent hours drawing and painting. Lucas was the quiet intellectual, always buried in books beyond his grade level. And Sophia was pure sunshine, spreading joy wherever she went with her infectious laughter and boundless energy. Little Nathaniel, at 3 years old, was just starting to develop his own personality. So far, he seemed to be equal parts all of his siblings. The video call connected, and Vanessa's face appeared on screen. At 33, Vanessa had grown into her own strength. Her daughter Hope, now 5.5, occasionally appeared in frame, a serious little girl who'd inherited her mother's determination. Vanessa had remarried too, to a kind, gentle man who never once questioned her worth or tried to control her. "You ready for this?" Vanessa asked, referring to the documentary. "Once it airs, we're going to be reliving a lot of painful memories." "I'm ready," Isabella said. "Because for every painful memory we relive, we're potentially saving another woman from creating her own. That makes it worth it." They spent an hour discussing the production schedule, which interviews to prioritize, how to handle the inevitable media attention. When they finished, Vanessa said something unexpected. "I heard from him last week." Isabella didn't need to ask who. "What did he want?" "To apologize." "Again." Apparently, he's been in intensive therapy for years, working through his narcissistic tendencies. He wanted to make amends as part of his recovery process. He asked about Hope, whether I'd consider supervised visits. What did you tell him? I told him I appreciated his growth, but Hope is happy and stable, and introducing her father's chaos into her life isn't something I'm willing to risk. Maybe when she's older, she can make that choice. But right now, my job is protecting her, not facilitating his redemption arc. That's fair, Isabella said. How did he take it? Surprisingly well, actually. He said he understood. That he'd work on being someone worthy of knowing his daughter someday, and if that day never came, he'd accept it as a consequence of his actions. Isabella was surprised to feel something like relief. Not for Dominic, but for the idea that people could change, even people who'd done terrible things. It didn't erase what he'd done. It didn't mean he deserved forgiveness or access to the people he'd hurt. But it meant the cycle could stop. That he wouldn't create more victims. That was something. After the call ended, Isabella's assistant knocked on her door. You have visitors. They say it's personal? Curious, Isabella went to the reception area and found a young woman, maybe 25, standing nervously with an older woman who shared her features. Mother and daughter, clearly. Ms. Reeves? I'm Emma, and this is my mom, Patricia. I read your book. And I needed to tell you something. Isabella led them to a private conference room, sensing this was going to be emotional. Emma explained haltingly that she'd been in a relationship much like Isabella's marriage, a partner who isolated her, blamed her for everything, made her believe she was the problem. She'd read Unbroken, and recognized her own story in Isabella's. She'd left the relationship, gone to therapy, started rebuilding her life. But the reason I'm here, Emma said, tears streaming down her face, is that my younger sister is in a similar relationship now. And she won't listen to me because she's so deep in his manipulation that she thinks I'm just jealous. But I hope, that maybe if you talk to her, if she heard directly from you that survival is possible, that she's not crazy, that this isn't normal, maybe she'd listen. Isabella's heart broke for this young woman and her sister trapped in the same nightmare Isabella had lived. I'll talk to her. Give me her contact information. And Emma? You did the right thing by leaving. You're so much braver than you know. After they left, Isabella sat in the conference room for a while, processing. This was why she told her story, why she continued to speak publicly despite the exhaustion and emotional toll. Because every Emma who found the strength to leave, every sister who might be saved, made it worth reliving her pain. That evening, Isabella arrived home to beautiful chaos. Nathaniel had finger-painted the kitchen walls. Sophia and Hope, who was over for a playdate, had decided to give the dog a makeover, and he was now wearing a tutu. The boys were engaged in an elaborate game that seemed to involve every pillow in the house and unclear rules about dragons. James was attempting to cook dinner while mediating disputes and occasionally stepping on toys. How was your day? He asked, pulling Isabella in for a kiss despite the chaos surrounding them. Productive. Emotional. The usual, Isabella replied, swooping down to tickle Nathaniel, who squealed with delight. How about yours? The dishwasher broke. Sebastian got sent to the principal's office for defending a kid who was being bullied. Apparently his method of defending involved some choice words we need to talk to him about. And your mother called to inform me, again, that 5 children is too many and we should consider stopping now. Isabella laughed. Noted. But I think we're done. Unless you're secretly hoping for number 6? I love our chaos, but I also value what little sanity I have left, James said, grinning. 5 is perfect. After dinner, a loud, messy affair that involved more food on the floor than in mouths, James handled bath time while Isabella went to tuck in the older kids. She sat on Elijah's bed while all 4 of them clustered around her, a nightly ritual they'd maintained since they were toddlers. Tell us the story, Mama, Sophia requested. About when you were brave. It was a story Isabella had told them many times, age-appropriately edited, about how their mama had once been in a relationship with someone who wasn't kind. About how she'd been sad for a while but had gotten help from doctors who talked to people about their feelings. About how she'd had to be very brave to leave and start a new life. About how she'd wanted children so much that she'd found a special doctor who helped her have them. About how their mama had built a successful business and written a book and helped lots of people. About how being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing the hard thing even when you're scared. The kids had heard the story dozens of times, but they never tired of it. Isabella suspected it made them feel secure, knowing their mother had faced difficulties and overcome them. It taught them that hard times don't last forever. That you can rebuild from ruins. That strength isn't about never falling, it's about getting back up. After kisses and goodnight hugs, Isabella found James in their bedroom, scrolling through his phone. "Emma's sister reached out," he said. "The one you talked to today. She wants to meet with you next week." "That's good," Isabella said, feeling hopeful. "Maybe we can reach her before it's too late." "Do you ever get tired of it?" James asked. "The constant requests for help, the emotional labor of reliving your trauma to help others?" Isabella considered this. "Sometimes. Some days I want to just be Isabella Reeves, business owner and mom, not Isabella Reeves, survivor and advocate. But then I remember what it felt like to be completely alone, convinced I was crazy, with no one to tell me I wasn't. And I remember that every woman I help is one less woman suffering alone. So no, I don't get tired of it." "Not really." James pulled her close. "You're remarkable, you know that? I'm just doing what anyone would do." "That's where you're wrong," James said softly. "Most people wouldn't. Most people would take their survival and run, would hide from the pain rather than using it to help others. But you turned your wound into wisdom. That's not something just anyone would do." Isabella settled against him, feeling safe and loved in a way she'd never felt during her marriage to Dominic. This was what healthy love looked like: mutual respect, genuine partnership, the freedom to be fully yourself. She wished every woman could experience it, could know the difference between love that lifts you up and love that tears you down. The next few years unfolded with a satisfying rhythm. The documentary series aired to critical acclaim and sparked national conversations about coercive control and psychological abuse. New legislation was introduced in several states to better protect victims of non-physical domestic violence. Isabella's foundation, established with proceeds from her book, provided grants to women leaving abusive relationships, funding therapy, legal fees, childcare, whatever they needed to build new lives. Her company continued to thrive. The Quadruplets became teenagers, a whole new adventure that involved navigating hormones, social media, first crushes, and the eternal question of, "What's for dinner?" that somehow always received the answer of, "I don't know." Despite a full refrigerator. Nathaniel started elementary school, proudly telling everyone his big siblings were quadruplets. James got a promotion that allowed him to work from home more often, which everyone appreciated. Isabella's relationship with her body transformed too. After years of seeing it as broken, as something that had betrayed her, she'd gradually learned to appreciate it for what it had done: carried 4 babies, birthed them safely, nursed them, rebuilt itself after trauma, conceived and birthed Nathaniel. Her body wasn't perfect by societal standards, but it was strong and capable, and hers. That was enough. Before we continue, can I ask a tiny favor? Hit that subscribe button. It means more than you know. On what would have been her 15th wedding anniversary to Dominic, though she only remembered because Maya sent a text saying, "Happy Freedom Day," Isabella received an unexpected package. Inside was a letter and a check for a substantial amount. The letter was from Dominic. "Isabella, I know you don't want to hear from me, and this will be the last time I contact you, I promise. I've spent the last 8 years in therapy, working to understand why I did what I did, learning to be a better person. I'll never be able to undo the damage I caused, but I can at least try to make some form of restitution. The enclosed check is everything I've managed to save from my new career as a substance abuse counselor. I've been helping people recover from addictions for 5 years now, and it's shown me what real service looks like. I want you to use this money for your foundation, to help women I can never personally apologize to. I don't want thanks or acknowledgement. I just want something good to come from the money I'm earning, since the money I earned before came from stepping on people like you. I heard you and James have a son now. I'm genuinely happy for you. You deserve the family you wanted, and I'm glad you got it without any help from me. You're proof that we don't need the people who hurt us in order to thrive. Sometimes we thrive best in their absence. I'm working on being worthy of knowing my daughter hopes someday, though I understand that day may never come. If it doesn't, that's a consequence I accept. Thank you for showing me what accountability looks like. Even if I had to lose everything to learn it. Live well, Isabella. You earned it. Dominic. Isabella stared at the letter for a long time, feeling complicated. Dominic had clearly done significant work on himself. The man who'd written this letter was different from the man who'd divorced her, different even from the man who'd sued her. Growth was possible, apparently, even for people who'd done terrible things. She deposited the check directly into her foundation's account without responding to the letter. His redemption arc wasn't her responsibility. But she could use his money to help other women, turning his attempt at restitution into something genuinely useful. She told James about the letter that evening. How do you feel? He asked. Weirdly neutral, Isabella admitted. I'm glad he's changed. I'm glad he's not out there creating more victims. But his growth doesn't undo what he did, and I don't owe him forgiveness just because he finally figured out how to be a decent human. Does that make me petty? It makes you honest, James said. You don't owe your abuser anything, including being happy about his personal growth. Isabella nodded, feeling validated. That night, she burned the letter in their fireplace, watching Dominic's words turn to ash. It felt symbolic, the final release of any hold he might still have on her emotions. He was just a chapter in her history now, not a character in her present. 10 years after the baby shower that had changed everything, Isabella stood on a stage in front of 5,000 people at a national conference on domestic violence prevention. Her hair was graying at the temples now. She'd stopped dyeing it, deciding that her gray hair had been earned through wisdom and struggle. Her quadruplets were in high school, already talking about college. Nathaniel was in 3rd grade and had just announced he wanted to be a scientist like his big brother Elijah. I'm often asked how I survived, Isabella said to the crowd. And I think people expect me to have some profound answer, some secret technique. But the truth is simpler and harder than that. I survived by deciding that my abuser didn't get to write the ending of my story. I survived by accepting help when I needed it instead of pretending I was fine. I survived by believing other women when they told me I wasn't crazy, even when every voice in my head had been trained to doubt myself. I survived by building a new life so beautiful that my old life became irrelevant. And I survived by refusing to let what happened to me be meaningless. Every woman I help, every story I share, every conversation I have about coercive control, that's how I make meaning from pain. That's how I survived not just the abuse, but the aftermath. The standing ovation lasted for 5 minutes. Afterward, hundreds of women lined up to talk to her, to share their stories, to thank her for her advocacy. Isabella stayed until she'd spoken to every single one, until the venue staff was ready to lock up, until her voice was hoarse and her feet hurt. Because this was her purpose, being the voice for women who hadn't found theirs yet, being the proof that survival was possible, being the light in someone else's darkness. That night, exhausted but satisfied, Isabella video-called her family. James appeared on screen with all 5 kids crowded around him, everyone talking at once. Mom, when are you coming home? Did you save the world today, Mama? Nate drew you a picture. Can we get a puppy? The familiar chaos made her smile. I'll be home tomorrow, she promised. And no, we're not getting a puppy. Later, alone in her hotel room, Isabella looked at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back was confident, strong, scarred but unbroken. She'd been through hell and come out refined by fire rather than consumed by it. She'd taken the worst thing that ever happened to her and transformed it into her life's purpose. She'd won. Not just against Dominic, but against the voice in her head that had told her she was worthless. Against the shame that had tried to silence her. Against the fear that had almost kept her trapped. She'd won by surviving, thriving, and helping others do the same. The next morning, Isabella flew home. She walked through her front door to chaos. Kids arguing over the TV remote. James trying to cook breakfast while simultaneously breaking up a dispute over whose turn it was to feed the dog. Toys everywhere, dishes in the sink, the beautiful, messy reality of a full life. Elijah looked up from his science homework. "Hey Mom! Did you change the world?" Isabella set down her bags and pulled her eldest into a hug. "I'm working on it, baby. One story at a time." "That's cool," he said, then immediately returned to his homework, because he was a teenager and sustained displays of affection were apparently uncool. Isabella looked around her home, not perfect, not magazine-worthy, but full of love and laughter and realness. This was her legacy. Not her book or her business or her advocacy work, though all of that mattered. Her real legacy was showing her children that you can survive terrible things and build beautiful things. That strength isn't about never falling, it's about getting back up. That your worth isn't determined by what someone else thinks of you. That families are built on love and choice, not just biology. She'd come so far from the woman who'd signed divorce papers with shaking hands, believing she was worthless. She'd rebuilt herself into someone stronger, more authentic, more whole. And in doing so, she'd shown thousands of other women that they could do the same. Dominic Laurent had invited his childless ex-wife to his baby shower to mock her, to prove he'd won, to rub her face in his new life. Instead, Isabella Reeves had walked in with Quadruplets, and shattered every lie he'd ever told about her. But more than that, she'd walked away with her dignity intact, her truth validated, and a life so full and meaningful that his opinion became irrelevant. That was the real victory. That was the real ending. Not revenge. Not vindication. But simply becoming so fully, authentically herself that nothing anyone else said or did could diminish her again. Isabella Reeves was unbroken. And she'd remain that way for the rest of her life. Isabella Reeves founded the Unbroken Foundation, which has helped over 50,000 women leave abusive relationships. She continues to run her marketing firm, which is now valued at over $200 million. She and James have been happily married for 12 years and counting. The Quadruplets all graduated high school with honors and attend top universities studying sciences, arts, and humanities. Nathaniel is thriving as a middle schooler with a passion for environmental activism. Vanessa Laurent, now Vanessa Martinez, completed her therapy degree and runs a successful practice specializing in narcissistic abuse recovery. Her daughter Hope is a well-adjusted, confident 10-year-old who knows her mother is a warrior. Vanessa remarried and has twin daughters with her second husband. Dominic Laurent has spent the last decade working as a substance abuse counselor, helping others recover from addiction. He's been in continuous therapy addressing his narcissistic tendencies. He has supervised occasional contact with his daughter Hope, respecting Vanessa's boundaries. He lives modestly and quietly, no longer seeking power or status. Maya continues practicing law and serves on the board of Isabella's foundation. She's become one of the nation's leading experts on coercive control legislation. James left corporate tech work to focus on his family and freelance projects. He's published 2 children's books about families that come in all shapes and sizes. He's known in their community as the dad who coaches every sport poorly but enthusiastically. Dr. Morrison retired from medicine. He volunteers at a women's health clinic and has become an advocate for medical ethics reform. And most importantly, tens of thousands of women who read Isabella's book, heard her speak, or learned her story found the courage to leave their own abusive situations, to seek help, to believe they deserved better. Isabella's greatest legacy isn't her wealth or fame, it's every woman who saw herself in Isabella's story and decided she deserved her own unbroken ending.